On this week's episode of Friend Code, we're talking about Monolith Soft and what they might be working on for the Nintendo Switch. Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Friend Code. I'm your host, Michael Damiani. This week, I'm joined by Stealth.
Hello.
How's it going, man?
It's going good. Thanks for having me back on.
Yeah, good to have you back. Also, Matt Simmons from YoVideoGames. How's it going, dude?
How's it going, everybody? Thank you for having me on.
Yeah. We're here to talk about Monolith Soft, a company some people may or may not have heard of. I'm sure most people have hopefully heard of this company. We recently did an episode where we did a Friend Code where we did a deep dive into Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition and Future Connected. And I know as soon as you heard about it, Stealth, you hit me up on Twitter saying, hey, I really like this and stuff. And like, I always wanted to do a expanded Monolith Soft episode anyway, which I was talking about with Simmons. And the comments immediately after went up was like, hey, can you just do an episode just on Monolith Soft? You don't even have to talk about like Xenoblade Chronicles. Let's talk about like Monolith Soft, what they're working on, and give us a little bit more information on them, because I have always felt that they are probably one of the most valuable, if not the most valuable studio at Nintendo right now. They are, to me, my analogy I will use here is I feel like they are the development team for like the Final Fantasy 14 team at Square Enix, where they like just can't do any, Naoki Yoshida's production team, where they can just like do no wrong. They are just very respected. But the products they work on, because 14 is an MMORPG, people are like, that's not a single player at Final Fantasy, whatever. It does well. Whereas Xenoblade Chronicles, it's a series that they're probably the most known for, isn't a blockbuster series that sells the numbers that a Final Fantasy or a Dragon Quest or even some of the big Western RPGs would even sell. It just doesn't rank up there, especially even in Nintendo's earned terms. So I wanted to do another episode where we get together and talk about Monolith Soft and what they could be working on and what potential projects we'd like to see them be working on. And I know both of you have a lot to say here. So I'm gonna when we get through this, I'm gonna end up letting you do most of the talking here, because I feel like of the three of us, I am the newbie here. I'm with the two experts here. And one of the things I got asked about the most, even on the last episode, I'd love to have you two just talk about this first, to open up here, because it's the most obvious one. And when it comes to future projects, and it's been rumored. It's been rumored a lot recently. I don't know if it's very likely. And that is the chances of a Xenoblade Chronicles export for Switch.
So you get asked that a lot too.
A lot. It gets asked a lot about where's X? Oh, that 4chan rumor said X is coming for sure to Switch. When are we going to see it?
I personally, my thing is, and I've had to say this a lot, I personally don't think X is coming to the Switch. Like, I'm just going to put that out there. And the reason for that is that there was a lot of online integration with X. Even if it wasn't an MMO, wasn't even Monster Hunter, but it had online co-op and it had a lot of online functionality. And none of the hirings in the last years at Monolith Soft have had anything to do with like network administration, network programmers, nothing. So now that could mean that you could say like, well, they already had them from Xenoblade X's time, why they don't need anyone else. They could just use whoever's probably still there, maybe. But on the other hand, considering how, frankly, less of involved Nintendo is with online on the Switch than even the Wii U, in terms of like functionality and like social presence, like there's just Nintendo's not doing a whole lot with their Nintendo Switch Online. Like they don't have like a Miiverse, they don't have like a push for stuff. They went back to friend codes even, which the Wii U didn't have. So for me, I look at it and now you could try to gut it all out of Xenoblade X, but like Xenoblade X was meant to be an always online game. Like when you were offline, it would always have a permanent watermark on your screen saying playing in offline mode. Like, so for me, as much as it might seem like that it shouldn't be that big of a deal, my gut feeling is just that there's too many network features that were built into the core mechanics of Xenoblade X, and Monolith doesn't seem to have any interest in doing anything with a network or using network engineering at all or programming. So for me, I'm just like, I don't think they're just going to do it. I just don't think they're doing it. They've made some comments like, "Oh, it would cost a lot of money," but I don't know. I don't know how you feel, Stealth, about it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the priority was definitely remaking the original Xenoblade, just because the story ties so closely with 2, and that was the priority. And I was actually kind of shocked that they did Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition completely in-house. I just don't see them handing Xenoblade X to anybody else unless they were the ones who were going to do it. And if they're on other bigger projects, I just don't know if they would splinter off their team again to work on it.
Yeah, I could see maybe someone like, remember Monster Games did the 3DS version. I could see them maybe wanting to have a shot, maybe, or someone like that. Maybe like, you know, pull another smaller studio like Tantalus, maybe. But I think that would be like if Nintendo wanted it, because I think Monolith Soft would be the first one to champion a Xenoblade export. But at the end of the day, ultimately, Nintendo's going to make that call, and I don't know. I can't imagine Nintendo going like, well, you're busy with your stuff. We really want Xenoblade X. Let's go to someone else like Monster Games or Tantalus or whoever and see if they'll port it for us to. I don't know. It could absolutely happen. My gut feeling is just that it won't.
Yeah, I would just assume that, you know, Monolith Soft would want to add new content to X, and then they'd have to be involved with any new game.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've seen the archives like art book for it, like the quote unquote perfect works for Xenoblade X. There was a section in the back, and it was actually like sealed, and you had to like manually yourself break the seal to like look at these pages because it was full of just dropped giant bits of story. Like they had a much bigger narrative originally planned for Xenoblade X, and then as the game ballooned in scope, they had to cut most of the story narrative stuff out and down to what it was. So there was a ton of stuff they had planned, narratively speaking. And it's like, if they did go back to X, I think they would probably want to dip into that themselves and be like, okay, well, we had a lot of story stuff we planned and cut. Like, let's go back to that. But then again, that's again more development time and resources from a studio that I'm convinced is making 3 other giant projects right now.
Yeah.
So
I have a follow-up question about the online. Just because I don't want to talk about this other rumor. There's been a rumor about Skyward Sword HD remaster coming to Switch. It's not the
which
first time
Monolith
it's come up.
Soft worked on.
Yeah, which was involved in. But whenever that gets brought up, the question of reworking the motion controls always comes up because of how integral it was to the Wii version of the game. So would you ever think that I understand you illustrated the point that this would probably take Monolith Soft off of potentially more important projects, especially when it comes to the issue of money and sales and Nintendo wanting to push games that would have a better chance to sell. But let's say if that wasn't an issue anymore, do you think there's a way that they could rework X with the online to maybe rework how online worked in a game, or outright just removing it and reintegrating it into some kind of like just doing something else with it entirely?
I think they could, but like I think you already hit the nail on the head. You know, would they spend the time and resources to do that? I think that's just my original point with X. Like it could happen, absolutely. And I'm not saying it won't happen. My instinct, like my gut feeling is I don't think they're going to spend the time to rework it, because they could. They absolutely could. There's no question in my mind they could do it. I just don't think they will.
Yeah. I mean, and it's not even a situation where like this is like a black sheep game that they don't really care about. You know, if you go on Monolith Soft's website and the 10th anniversary image, Elma is right there in the middle of the screen. Like they care about that game, but I agree. It's a matter of resources.
Then before I guess this kind of transitions into maybe like future games they're working on. Based on that, I would imagine it would be more likely that they make a successor to X, like a whole new project that takes maybe in the style of X and take what they learn to build a new project. And I think this ties into I'm skipping ahead to, this wasn't the first new project they announced, but this is one of the new projects they've announced in the past few years. This is I'm alluding to the Xenoblade Chronicles Team's 2018 project announcement. The team responsible for Xenoblade, they started hiring for a new RPG starting in October of 2018.
Mm-hmm.
This is the main Tokyo studio. It's funny because in September of 2018, Takahashi, one of the co-founders and heads of Monolith Soft, said that there were no firm plans to continue the Xenoblade series. But that changed pretty recently, because in June of this year, he then turned around and said that one of Monolith Soft's current goals is to continue to expand the Xenoblade Chronicles brand. I
feel we have to point something out, Mike, that Takahashi is an unreliable narrator. Because I'll never forget, I guess this is a little bit spoilery, but like at E3 2017, I watched the big Nintendo Treehouse presentation. They're like, this is a numbered title. Does this have any connection to Xenoblade 1? And he's like, well, it'll have themes and it'll have like similar gameplay and it's more story, but they're separate universes. They don't have any connection. Like there's no connection to the first game. I'm like, you lie. 6 months later when the game came out, I was like, you liar. So that's where I'm all a little bit like, because I know exactly with those two quotes where he was like, we're thinking with this, I don't know, maybe nothing's been announced, nothing's been planned, and then here we are 6 months later, like, oh yeah, we're definitely trying to expand the branding of Xenoblade. I'm like, okay, he's pulling some shenanigans sometimes where he lies straight up about
I feel like maybe he's more known for doing that than others, but I feel like a lot of developers sometimes just have to do that. Either things change over time or they really just don't want to give away, so they're just lie. I mean, I think it's just commonplace in this business.
I think it was great that he did too. It's like I'm not bitter or angry about that. I'm just like, oh, okay, cool, whatever, awesome.
Don't spoil that ahead of time. That's nice to let the player find that out on their own.
Yeah, because like even for announcements, like however many months ago, where he said we haven't announced anything, we haven't decided anything, you kind of put it out of your mind. He says they're not thinking about anything, so you're like, oh, I guess they're just not that far along or whatever. So you just kind of blank out on it, and then here we get close to the launch of Xenoblade Definitive, and you're like, oh yeah, we're working on towards the next game, and I'm like, whoa, now you're actually excited. Which you wouldn't have been nearly as excited as you were months ago. So, because I guess just wasn't a good time to talk about it.
Yeah. So let me ask you this: whatever the Xenoblade team is working on, I want to know what it is you personally want them to do for their next project, the Xenoblade related project. Let's assume it's Xenoblade related. And I'm curious, do you think, we were just talking about like X, obviously we have the other two games in this series. Do you think there is stuff that we might see from X work its way into this new project, or do you think it'll be more an evolution of Xenoblade Chronicles to 2, and an evolution basically of 2 and Torna, and it's their DLC is Torna and Feature Connected?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to see Xenoblade Chronicles 3. I think the idea of having this multiverse where there's a lot of the same themes, a lot of the same characters, but presented in a very different way, I find that pretty compelling. While I liked Xenoblade Chronicles X, and I know it left off on a cliffhanger, I kind of like where they're going with the main series. And I think, now with the series kind of being as popular as it's ever been, as well known as it's ever been, I don't think the time for, X2 is here. I think doing a Xenoblade Chronicles 3, at least for me, that would get me the most excited.
I think this is more of a prediction than necessarily what I want necessarily, but I'm guessing that mechs are going to come back in 3. I think if you're really astute into the overall Xeno lore, starting from Gears all the way on up, you've probably figured out by now that Xenoblade is actually retelling the Gears storyline from the beginning, which was weird because they they really made that apparent from a model figure they released in Japan for the Siren mecha figure, and they had this whole little backstory booklet that came with the model figure, and the storyline from the character Mui Mui from Xenoblade 2 was, wait a minute, if you read it, like, that's the start of Xenosaga. Wait, that's also in the Perfect Works of Xenogears. You're like, oh, he's retelling the whole saga. So my feeling is that I think we're going to get more future savvy with the next Xenoblade. I think there's even been talk about hiring mechanical, like not mechanical engineers, but people who are artists who are, more mech oriented, mech designed. So part of me actually kind of wants to see, maybe instead of Titan hopping, maybe something a little more out there, maybe going as far as like planet hopping, like getting further into that Xenosaga, not like Xenosaga, not the games, but like because I think we've done Titans, right? We've done Titans. I mean, Mira was just a planet, but the core aspects of Xenoblade games have been like, you're on these big living bodies of giant creatures, and then there were like more but smaller creatures in 2. And I kind of wonder if maybe instead of Titans, maybe they're going to go into full on space travel with the next one, or just planet to planet, perhaps. I don't know. I just kind of seeing how things are going with the way the lore is. I'm just like, I think we're going into space, or we're definitely, if we're not going into space, we're going into a more futuristic, techno savvy heading, which you always see hints of near the end of the Xenoblade games. But I don't know. Personally, I'd be kind of excited for something like that. Like, I still think all 3 Xenoblades do something like the best. If you like X, I love the size and exploration of X. It's something I would like to see actually brought into part 3. But I prefer the narrative focus of 1 and 2 personally, and I like the battle system of 2. I think is really good. So, every single one of the games brings something to the table, and I think it would be really cool if maybe they could just take the best aspects of 1, X2 into a part 3, and go for that. That's kind of what I would like, I guess. Like, it's kind of I guess it feels like a cop-out answer. It's just like, take the best things of all their games. And I'm like, but for real, like, the map designs of like 1 and in like the exploration of X and like more of like the combat of 2, everything brings something to the table. So, yeah, like I feel like there is like, I already feel these games are like close to my favorites, but it's like I feel like there is a perfect RPG within the 3 Xenoblade games already. And yeah, if you could find a way to combine all 3 of them, I think, yeah, I'd definitely be very excited about that. I mean, if I was getting radical, there'd be some. If I was up to me, I'd radically alter anything. I'd be like, get Platinum in there to make a real-time combat system with their map designs and narrative and everything. To me, that would be the most perfect video game ever. But good luck to maintain frame rate there.
I could see them being like, nope, 60 frames or bust. Get out of here. With
well, Astral Chain was 30, so I mean,
that's true.
Would do it.
Those are some good ideas there. And honestly, I don't see anything wrong with taking the best parts of their previous efforts to make something new. In fact, you covered something I was going to ask you about, both of you about, is with the talk about X. You both made it pretty clear that it seems like X, a successor to X, doesn't seem like the most viable next entry, especially they're trying to grow the franchise. A third entry in Xenoblade Chronicles. I keep saying Xenoblade Chronicles versus Xenoblade Chronicles. I don't want to have that debate, but just because I know I guess the authentic way is Xeno, but like the marketing in North America says Xeno sometimes. I'm just like, whatever. Whatever. It's like Ghibli to me. It's like,
well, if you notice, I never say Chronicles.
Yeah, I don't like the Chronicles part. My one wish would have been to ditch that, just to have Xenoblade be like the title. But anyway, you brought up the point about what you'd like to see from X brought into it, and then you worked that into the best parts of the 3. So my question is on your idea specifically. You talk about traveling to different planets. We've seen other games do traveling to planets, which Metro Prime 3 Corruption, the Mass Effect series, the Star Ocean series. And I want to just say this right now, for me personally, none of these games have done justice to those planets like any individual environment in any of the 3 Xenoblade games. I worry about scale being compromised because they have to add so many different worlds, or they feel like this is just the ice world, so it's just a big ice environment. I kind of like the flow of the design, especially of 1 and 2's worlds. I don't want to sacrifice this. So do you think, as technically skilled with open world design as Monolith Soft is, did either of you think they could actually pull off a game where you travel to multiple worlds and still make them feel massive and unique and not maybe so typecasted?
Yeah, that's a pretty good question. Where it would be like a Mario game where it's like you have the ice world and the lava world, and it would be completely separate environments. I actually do worry about that a little bit, just because how much could they actually fit into like a themed environment like that? I would prefer it to be just one big world, but a world so big that would require mech travel or some kind of crazy futuristic vehicle or something like that. I think that might serve them better because, one of my favorite parts of Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is the fact that each environment is so enormous, but it's completely connected. And, it does feel like one big world. I actually would be concerned if they did have to split it up to like 10 to 12 worlds, that you wouldn't get any variety in environment.
Although there is, like you said, there's a good point there, because like when in 1 and 2, actually thinking about both of them, not so much X, but even X to an extent, when you're playing 1, you always can like look either up or down the Titan and across to the other Titan. So that's always kind of like this cool visual landmark. And in 2, you always see the world tree at some point, whether it's close or far. And then like X, you can kind of see some of the other continents from distances and some of their big landmarks. So that is kind of one thing that I think probably is in the big favor of having it set on a singular planet, where you always have like some defining iconic landmark like in the distance, which does sort of help with the cohesive feel of all 3 of games worlds. So that is definitely something, and maybe they'll do that. I'm for me, I'm not really super like, it must go even bigger and grander and do plan travel. I'm just like, they do just, to me, I'm guessing. To me, it's just like, if I was a guessing man, I'm like, I think they're going to try to go space opera. I don't know, but that's a real big guess on my part. Not really a desire, if you will, one way or the other.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at Xenoblade Chronicles 2 specifically, I mean, the world itself is very fantasy. There is a steampunk kind of town area. I would like a more futuristic kind of world, maybe kind of like Final Fantasy VI. I'm not really sure, but something a little bit more futuristic, but just one big futuristic world that I think would be very, very different, at least Xenoblade Chronicles 2.
I think that would actually be a big challenge because, not to get too spoilery, but whatever. When the last few chapters of Xenoblade 2, when you're climbing the world tree, it goes full techno, right? It goes full futuristic. And frankly, it's kind of like one of the biggest faults I have with the Xenosaga series, which is that like it is boring to look at. Some people really like it, but I'm like, the metallic corridors and just general robots and whatever industrial kind of look and stuff, like it's kind of it's not a look that I feel carries a whole game very well. The 7 remake fans are going to eat me alive, but
I mean, I guess it goes to art direction, though. I think sometimes people don't. Sometimes the technology or the budget's not there to go to our own series here. Like the Mechonis, a lot of the zones in the Mechonis, some look a little samey because of they're going for the sort of a steampunk kind of like tech, future style technology angle in there, and sometimes it works well, like the when you first enter and you're seeing all the gears and how giant it is, but then like when you get to like the city part, it's kind of like this doesn't look as interesting as the more organic nature of Bionis. So but there are games like, for me, I like Final Fantasy VII Remake when it gets into some of its into it so much more industrialized areas. I think there's a way to do it, but there is that pitfall of looking like an Apple store or looking to, like sterile. And how do you make sterile futuristic look good? I think you just have to get creative. And I do think they've shown a lot of creativity in their games with Monolith Soft. I think it's a challenge they're willing to take. And I kind of would like that. I like the idea, Stealth, of a single planet. I'm more for that as well. And I would like to see them mix up integrating more future technology, like a futuristic city environment, at least for part of it, because a lot of the games I mentioned earlier that do the planet hopping, like the most notorious and infamous one of these is Star Ocean. A game that's supposed to be all about this future technology, and almost like a majority of every game takes place on like medieval fantasy planets, like environments, like Renaissance fair stuff. It's like, like that's what they do. They just don't, like, you're on the ship for a second, now you're back in, we have to have the fantasy element. But
I mean, it's an older game, but I don't know if either of you played Rogue Galaxy from level 5 on PS2. That's kind of, that did it kind of well, more like Star Wars in a way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But, it definitely did it. It made it feel like, you were really planet hopping because the ship was interesting and the characters were super interesting.
I mean, I'm definitely down for that vibe for sure if they could pull that off. I mean, it's just with the scale, as you said, like that game, the scale of the environments, they're actually not that big, those environments in that game, from what I remember. It's just very grindy because there's so many enemies here that you have to go through. But I think the specialty of Monolith is crafting those nice organic feeling worlds. And I'm all for just like a giant big planet that they make it even bigger than before. Sorry.
Yeah. And thing is, if it came down to it, if you were going to ask like me personally, I would much rather have Uriah and Letheria in particular, like, and even Gormott, like in Torna even too, to a smaller extent. But it's like, when like people like, oh, why do you like these games so much? I'm like, or because there's always some debate about like, why do you play these anime, super anime, weeby games or whatever. I'm just like, look at a place like Uriah, and it's like it's if you actually stop and look and see the size, the scope, and then just the colors and the art direction and the music, which I'm sure we'll get into this later on, like how important for me that is. That's, to me, that's such a big aspect to Monolith Soft, and why I'm a huge advocate for them, because when you're running across like those areas and whatnot, it's just like, this is beautiful, but also a little strange, but also exciting and enticing. And you want to go around and you want to see what's behind the, the next, beyond the river bend, beyond the next mountain or the next path. Like there's such an allure with the worlds they create. And they've said, Takahashi's even said in interviews about how kind of map design has taken the big priority. Like that is what he feels Monolith Soft is known for, is their map design. And he's absolutely right as far as I'm concerned, because that is, and that's the thing for me, that is makes me such a fanboy in a way, is their ability to create and design worlds. In fact, I believe honestly like that they're responsible for like the best part of Breath of the Wild, which is that world map. So so for me it's like I hope they actually I think they're going to go more future savvy, but I actually hope that most of the world design stays with this sort of just incredible not fantasy, but just incredible landscapes that you wouldn't see any other place than in a video game. But more importantly, you can run around in those things, and you're not just running down corridors of steel and trash and junk, and the game's actually open. I'm sorry. But yeah, like I want to run around in those giant, open, unique, beautiful landscapes that they do on significantly weaker hardware than the competition at this point. So that is a big thing for me, though. I hope it doesn't. I hope they don't even. I'd rather like not even bother trying to make too much of a futurist, like you said, an Apple store. Like, don't worry about making a giant spaceship you can run around in, because like, let's face it, the worst parts of Xenoblade X, in all respects, is New LA. The look of it, the sound of it, like I don't know. I mean, maybe you feel differently. Maybe you guys feel differently, but I was just like, the worst part of X is being in New LA.
Yeah, I tend to agree, but I also do agree that you're right. The landscapes, that's a very big part of it. Even just finding the secret areas, just which are very well hidden in many instances. And then, each secret area pretty much has an incredible view attached to that you'd never find. That's also really important. It's like you don't really get anything from, sometimes there's a chest in the secret area, but really it's the view that is the secret.
They give you experience too.
Yeah, and they give you experience for like locating areas, which is also something that you don't. You see now more in modern RPGs, but I feel like Xenoblade was like one of the first RPGs where it's like it makes you want to explore because you get experience by finding these new landmarks and areas.
Yeah, I remember, Mike, you might remember when we were first playing the Japanese version of the game. Well, we were kind of like, I was super blown away and excited that they're like, wait, we're getting experience. I leveled up for finding this part of the map. That's awesome.
A lot of games, even if it wasn't the first, it is the popular thing to do now. Like a lot of RPGs do you found this new thing experience. But to your point, Stealth, it's something I love about mostly one, but the other games as well, is that I think you could strip away some of the other elements of Xenoblade. You can take away the combat, you can even take away the story, but if you still have the environments that they make, they're just so fun to explore. I think that's just a worthwhile endeavor on its own. That I can feel an immense amount of satisfaction from finding all this, the hidden areas, the gold icon ones, or just exploring the environment in general. It's just so fun. They make really good environments. So I do agree. This is kind of like their bread and butter. Like it's their biggest strength when it comes to open world design.
And they're smart about it too, because you'll go to like in Xenoblade 1, this one patch of area will be a wolf area. So all the wolf, I should say. So all the wolves will be in one area, like the wolf den, if you will. And you'll go to another area where there's like, hey, there's these crazy ruins on a cliff, and you go towards it, and all of a sudden, oh, there's a big old giant spider that likes to hang out underneath that plateau, and like a Turken colony in Torna. Where like one side of a cliffside is all like has all these like ropes and bridges and totems, but it's where all the Turkens live and hang out and stuff. So they don't just make cool maps; they actually sort of build their ecosystem around it too. Where they're like, put these enemy types here. Like, where would this enemy hang out? Oh, it would hang out here. So, and that's actually kind of super important. And I think it's something that just a lot of game developers in general sort of miss. Like they might build a big open world, but a lot of times they just kind of like put stuff wherever, where one thing Monolith does is like the animal enemy types seem to naturally be placed in these certain areas that would make sense for it. So I don't know. To me, it's another added touch of what makes their design on maps in general so good.
Speaking of design, one thing I want to ask you both about is character design for the next Xenoblade project. We've seen 3 games. We've seen 3 different cast of characters. Mm-hmm. I would say that there are people out there who have their favorites from each. I will say that 2 probably drew the most criticism for some of its character designs. And I'm kind of curious we don't really need to revisit the past. I think we've talked a lot about the character designs there. I'm kind of curious what you would like to see, what direction you'd like them to go with character designs with the new entry. Also, like what kind of like vibe do you want from the party? Because for me, I will say I really like the camaraderie of the crew in Xenoblade Chronicles. I would like to see them go more in that direction, but that might just be me.
Yeah, I feel like Xenoblade 2 kind of fell into the trap of like the artist of the week, where, they just wanted like 20 guest artists, each having their own kind of design, vision, and choice. And some of those, blade designs were really cool, and some of them were not. And some of the costumes, the main characters of 2 weren't great, but I felt like, Xenoblade 1 had such a great unified kind of look. I kind of would want, I wouldn't want that many artists to work on the character designs like in Xenoblade Chronicles 2. It was just a little bit, it kind of felt like Smash Brothers in a way, where it was like, oh, here's another guest, here's here's this, here's this manga artist that hasn't done anything in 20 years, but he's helping out on this. And, it just it just felt like too much. It just wasn't unified in any way.
Actually, so you're right. But the funny thing is, it never really gets brought up. I don't remember the exact interview as I dig up to dig this up, but Takahashi talked about that. He acknowledged that about the designs too. I'm not really a fan of the way most anyone looks into personally, just to get that out of the way, which shocks some people because they're like, you play it so much. I'm like, yeah, it doesn't mean I have to love the designs. But the one thing about 2 that doesn't seem to get brought up or I don't think anyone knows about is that when they were making 2, they went out to all those artists and he said, I didn't want to give them any direction specifically. I said, I just want you to create a character that you've always wanted just to see. So 2 had this weird thing where it was this free open gift to these artists to say, design a character, any character, no stipulations. So the artists were free to do whatever they want, which is why you get some wildly weird looking things. And that's, I don't know, I feel like that's really cool because if you're working in media as an artist or a character designer, you are always having to like compromise and redesign and like, you know, someone's always constantly telling you, I don't like this. Like you're always trying to mold someone else's vision for a character you design in media. So the fact that 2 was the one time where they went out and said, do whatever you want, just do whatever you want, we don't care, we'll make it, that's really cool. However, there's no cohesion
Yeah, that's
whatsoever there. So
I think yeah.
And Takahashi actually said he kind of regretted that. He said, I probably should have reined it in a little bit, but it is at that point, it was like, it is what it is for him at that point. So it's like, it's really cool that he let that happen that one time. But I think even Takahashi at one point went, yeah, not having any direction may not have been the best idea. But he's also talked about wanting to find a it guy or an it girl, whatever, like the man, the Nomura, if you will, of Monolith Soft. He's talked about he wants to find a character designer who's going to be the voice or the character design and representation of that company. Mm-hmm. That's something they actually talked about not even that long ago, like a year or 2 ago. I don't know if they have. I don't know. Yeah, because I don't know if he's found that person or not. They've certainly been promoting different illustrations on their website from some of their newer, younger hires. The person who did the 20th anniversary art. There's a couple people who did Nopon art, one of just Shulk holding, the Minato horizontally. And those are all like new people they've hired recently. So I don't know if any of those specific people on their website, if they've settled on them. I actually really like the person who did the 20th anniversary art. It's weird that, and I have a feeling I know why, but so there's this one artist, Kunihiko Tanaka, who did Xenogears, and he did Xenosaga 1 and Xenoblade X. So he's kind of like the Gears artist, if you will, as most people know him. And it's like, I'm kind of surprised he hasn't gone after him, but my theory is that his art is very hard to translate into 3D, and it almost never works because he has very rounded features, very rounded cheeks, chins, noses, and making anything round and bulbous in 3D has always been sort of difficult. So, especially with it's like an anime aesthetic that has very round features, which is unusual. So maybe that's why the original Gears and Xenoblade X artist is not being pulled in to be the Monolith Soft artist, if you will. I don't know, like I'd be personally down if they went after and got someone like Nobuteru Yuki, who did Chrono Cross and Escaflowne's character designs, or I think he only works with Mistwalker, but the character designer for Last Story, I thought is a pretty good character designer. I'd personally like to see a Xenoblade game go in that direction. He did a lot of, also Terra Battle art, but does anyone remember Terra Battle? I sure don't.
I mean, I remember it existing.
It exists, but the character designer though, who did like Last Story, I thought that was pretty good. Personally speaking,
Kimihiko Fujisaka. That's who's listed as the artist, the game artist for the Last Story. Yeah,
I really dug his character designs. I thought that would be a really cool person to bring in for Monolith Soft, but maybe he just likes to work freelance for Sakaguchi and Mistwalker. I don't have anything against what was it was like a Choco, and I don't know if it was Chico. whoever the name of the artist was who did Xenoblade 2, the Saito, who did the majority of Xenoblade 2's art. Like, I don't think he's a bad artist necessarily. I love what he did for Morag as a character design, but I don't really like any of his other designs. So it's kind of a weird thing where it's just like, yeah, I hope Takahashi finds his artistic or his character designer voice, and does do that. Although, I don't know, like I guess I'd throw it back to you. How would you feel if they became a more unified character designer art style for all of Monolith Soft rather than having these wildly different takes every single game? Like, how would you feel about that?
I mean, do you want to go stealth? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of, piggyback off that, it was kind of infuriating because I thought like the environmental design of Xenoblade Chronicles 2 was incredible. And so much time was spent on the characters and not enough time was spent on the environments, which I thought knocked it out of the park. In terms of one unified design for the characters, I think that would work for, the Xenoblade universe. For other maybe new IP that they're creating, giving a different artist and having them give their take on it might be good. But I definitely would not be opposed to having one kind of unified character design for the Xenoblade series.
Yeah, that's a good point. What were you gonna say, Mike?
I mean, what Stealth said is kind of how I feel they should go. They should get a head illustrator or an illustration team dedicated to Xenoblade series, and kind of be the ones that are the ones charged with coming up with those designs. I mean, the whole the backstory you gave on Xenoblade Chronicles 2. I'm with you, Simmons. I think there's nothing wrong with going to people and giving them, like, I don't want to give you any restrictions. The problem was going to so many different people who are working individually and isolated. If Takahashi had just gone to a few people and put them together and said, I'm not giving any direction, but you work together, come up with a unified design. That was all the direction they needed. It was just like, you just need to work together. And so I honestly, I'm open to anyone coming in. There are a lot of good suggestions you had there. I'm open to anyone. There are a lot of talented people and other Nintendo studios as well that they could lean into as well. But yeah, they absolutely should have something for Xenoblade. But I'm with you as well, Stealth. I don't think they should have a unified look for just Monolith Soft games, because I think they are capable of such a wide variety of projects that might kind of hold them back in some regards.
Yeah. I mean, even if we look at like Smash Brothers, for instance, and, all the guest, composers and everything, Sakurai would still be in the room kind of making sure that everything still sounded like it belonged in the game. In terms of Monolith Soft, it was definitely like the Wild Wild West in terms of the Xenoblade 2 characters, where it was like anything goes.
Yeah. So, yeah, for me, it's like, I'm glad that it exists just to see what that looks like. So now we know what that looks like. In the future. Like, if you just went to like 20 or 30 different artists and just said, do whatever you want, we know what we get now.
Yeah, that's very true.
So I was like, well, we have that, that's a thing. We know what it looks like now. I think it's okay in a sense where like Saito did almost all the main cast for all like the cutscene characters. So there's that, and then Nomura did like a few of the villains. So like I think that's the only thing that saved it from being like a complete like cluster mess right there. Just by at least one dude did most of the main designs, but unfortunately, I'm personally not really thrilled with the main dude's designs in Xenoblade 2. On a personal level, I'm not really thrilled with how they look. But I actually really like the characters and where the story goes into a lot. So in a lot of other things hold it up for me there. I don't know. I'm about to get in a rant about a different subject, so I'll just rein myself in there.
I will say I do hope they bring back the character customization options, like the clothing. I think that needs to come back.
Please. I absolutely 100%.
I think that needs to come back. Yeah. So that's the only thing I'd add as a caveat for that.
100%.
You did. I don't know if your other topic was relevant to this, Simmons, but you did make a reference earlier to the music, and how this series has had some of the best music that you can get in a video game. I mean, I think it ranks up there, honestly.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of trying to think of a good question to ask about this, because obviously, obviously people want, keep to the high standards. We want music it hits the high standards. I guess it's maybe about like stylistically. Do you think you'd want to ever see them try something different, or do you think they'd ever try something that kind of steps away from their comfort zone, or even if they go for more like a unified style or a more focused theme? Because as good as Xenoblade Chronicles music is, there are some other even RPGs I think that might slightly edge it out because of maybe that focus. I would present to the two of you the Persona series, especially Persona 5, Nier Automata's soundtrack.
On this one.
I mean, yeah, we don't need to get into this debate, but it's what you want. Like, what do you want to do? You think the status quo is fine because it's so excellent, or would you like to see them do something maybe a little different?
Go ahead, Stuff.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the music in Xenoblade Chronicles 2 was as close to perfect for me as maybe it could be. The towns had soft music, and when night hit, you'd get like a softer soundtrack of that same theme, and then you'd have like the hard rock themes, when there was a battle going on. I really liked the music in Xenoblade 2 because it was very varied, and it felt like each area had a bunch of tracks. I'm perfectly content with their direction there.
All right.
I think I can't even imagine even the idea of branching out from what they did with 2, because like one was a bunch of different composers, but they didn't have huge budget, right? So they were kind of working with their studio, what they had within their own little studio, right? Xenoblade X was Hiroyuki Sawano from Attack on Titan fame and some other stuff, and he's just alone. That's the only time they had a sole composer was for X. And he went full bombastic, all over the
Black Tar.
Black Tar. Okay. So for Xenoblade 2, again, it was another group collaboration effort, but this time instead of Yoko Shimomura, it was Yasunori Mitsuda. And I personally feel Mitsuda is the best composer like alive today. But I think what people don't get is that Mitsuda went all kinds of out for a Xenoblade 2 soundtrack, because he went and he got like I forget how many people, but like just it was a large number orchestra, and then he got a full choir from I forget where, some Eastern European choir. He got an Irish choir, Anunia, for other songs to do in the game, notably Tantal's themes and I forget whatever as my mind's blanking on the Vatican City place, but like so he got them, and then he went out and found a personal singer to do some of the emotional beat songs that were in the game. So there was so much variety in the music of Xenoblade 2, and there was such high quality. Like he was going out and getting live instrumentation. Like if you dig back on his Twitter, you can find like he had this giant thick book, and this was like, these are the notes for the music in Xenoblade 2. And the fact that it got like no recognition from like anybody in the year it came out for soundtrack is, to me, it was like insanity.
That drove me crazy.
Yeah, like the absolute insanity that it didn't even get any not even a nomination, despite the fact that it had like 100+ person orchestras and choirs, and it went out and got individuals from the UK and like an Irish, a Celtic Irish choir as well to do some of the other songs for some of the more dramatic stuff for Indol and for Tantal and stuff like that. So it's just, to me, like there was so much variety in the music where it's like, I know you brought up Persona, but it's like, I like Persona's music's good, but it's very focused into its, like say Persona 5 is like it's very focused into its acid jazz theme. And I felt this a bit with Torna, where Torna went more jazzy, and it's good, but like I don't think I'd want to have 100 hours of the same style of music. I like how you have stuff that bounces from orchestral to like Gregorian to rock, to like something that sounds like not alt rock, but like like games. Like I would much rather have that large sweeping variety of different styles of music and type than one genre of music only that lasts the whole game. Like for me, that's where, okay, I get it, more cohesive, but no, I want every area to sound unique and have its own flavor and have its own distinct thing. Because I think what's missing in video games a lot today is that if you hear the theme of an area in Xenoblade, you know where that area is. You hear that music and you're just reminded of running across, that area of the game. You don't get that a lot in video games anymore. Like you don't get like that, you hear this and like, that reminds me so much of all those times and all the things I did, roaming around here, like the super like 70s style, horns blaring of More Ardain, roaming the waste there and stuff like that. And like the battle theme alone from Definitive Edition, where it's like super funky and stuff. So it's like, I don't know, like to me that's so much more important to have this diversity, because then it adds to the character of the environment. Like it is part of the identity of these games and of these specific places in these games. And when everything sounds super similar, everything just starts blurring together. Like that's a personal rant for me, is just that I hope they bring Mitsuda back, and I hope Mitsuda goes all out, and I hope Nintendo allows Monolith Soft to give him whatever funds he needs for Mitsuda and Ace and Minami Kyoto-san, I believe is her name. Just do what you've always done. Just like don't spare any expense on the instrumentation.
Yeah, we completely agree there. And you made me angry all over again that game was not nominated for, best soundtrack at the Game Awards in 2017 or 18.
Yeah, I will always hold that over Keeley in the Game Awards for not even recognizing it.
Hey, I tweeted out. I said it was Rob.
Absolutely robbed. Apparently, I didn't even know this. Like Bloodborne apparently was super robbed the year it came out too. But whatever. Either way, the point is that like I don't know how you could have a soundtrack that spent as much time and effort and that it did for that game and just not even recognize it in any capacity.
Well, it does sound like, I mean, I'm on board with you. I was just trying to play devil's advocate by bringing up some other arguments I'd seen about where the direction of Xenoblade Chronicles soundtrack could go, or what they could do with the sound design going forward. But I think you hit the nail on the head with the sense of feeling, that feeling. You can identify where you were when you heard that song. It conjures up memories of that. And that's some of my favorite type of music design and audio design in video games, is when you can have that, hear those notes and you're like, yeah, we're playing. And Social Marsh. I'm here. I know these things, and then like having the day-night versions, it's just like they go above and beyond. I'm on board too.
There's nothing to me more like sort of goosebumpy than like in Torna. When you first turn on Torna, you hear this really great piano song for the title screen, because like every Xenoblade game has its own title screen music, right? And they're always great. And then you realize when you beat Torna that like the ending song, the vocal song, is the song that they play on just piano at the beginning of the game. And there's all kinds of story kind of like relevance to it. Like the way it loops around and brings it all together. It's just like, it's super impactful. Like that song becomes way more important like when you realize that there's actually a lyrics and a story behind the song. And every time you boot up that game and hear that title screen music, you're hearing that ending theme, which is summarizing the game that you just went through or whatever, or when you go back to it. So it's kind of like that to me, that's real mark of genius and really using music to its full extent in video games. Which, yeah, like there are some big games that's like, even though I enjoy them, like I'm still kind of bitter about like the no music.
Yep, I'm with you. I just wanted to have give you an opportunity to say what I also passionately believe in as well. Just had to seem a little impartial with the question there. I do want to tie this together and kind of like wrap up the Xenoblade part of the Monolith Soft talk here, because I have a patron question from Chris Snow. Mm-hmm. And this is where you get to have some fun with your lore knowledge and like theories of maybe connectivity. Chris asked, how do you think Monolith Soft could tie Xenosaga and Xenoblade together in a future entry. Or rather, could they even do that? Would they?
100%.
Yeah.
Yes and yes.
Yeah, I mean they could do that. I mean obviously they put pretty much many of the main Xeno universe characters in Xenoblade 2 with this portal where they all just come in, or their blades or whatever. So it is possible that they could do some kind of multiverse shenanigans and somehow connect everything. I mean, obviously, I'm not the writer for Xenoblade. They've hired much smarter people to figure out how to connect everything. But can they? Of course, because they've already opened the door for these other dimensions and things like that.
How spoilery do you want me to get with this answer? Is the real question.
All right, so I'll put a time code in the video right now. If you're listening or watching on YouTube, I'll put a time code right now. This mark, I'm putting my hands up like this for me. This means this is where I mark spoiler start. When I put my thumbs back up, we'll be done with the spoiler talk. So go ahead, Simmons, fire away.
Of course. Well, the first thing to get out of the way is they have to get around copyright. So Namco has to be okay with it, but Namco's already shown they're okay with this because they allowed Cosmos and Telos in Xenoblade 2. So here's the thing. At the end of Xenoblade 2, Klaus says a very specific line about the conduit, as they call it in English, which is in the data files called the Zohar within the game's data mining. When he says, like, when it leaves, it'll go to places we can never go to. I'm kind of paraphrasing, but the line basically implies that, like, it's a doorway to other worlds, and when it disappears from this universe, it's going to go somewhere and we can't follow, kind of thing. So to me, it was always like this big nod reference, like, okay, he's talking about like the other Xeno universes, if you will. They would probably tie it together because in Xenosaga, the big part of that game is talking about the numbered universe and the imaginary universe, if you will, which is the gnosis and all the tying in of that does, which is basically saying, like, there's a higher dimension, and then there's like the enemies that appear in the world are like you can't affect them, like weapons just go through them, and you have to use the Hilbert effect, which is very, 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 very similar to what's going on in Definitive Edition. With the enemies there. So I think the key to all of this is in the Zohar, and it's even backed up further by the art image on their 10th anniversary on their website, which features the Zohar prominently in the background. I think what's really going on here is that I personally think that when the conduit disappears at the end of Xenoblade 2 and leaves that universe, which causes all kinds of things, which we're still kind of like, some of which we know, some of which we're guessing, which happened in Xenoblade 1 and 2. I think it's possible that that's when the Zohar appeared in the universe, you could say, in the others, say, Xenosaga universe. And that is the tying link, because the Zohar in all Xeno games is a machine that siphons energy from basically the fifth dimension, which gives you infinite resource, like infinite power. However, within the Zohar is a thing called the wave existence, which is from Xenogears. And basically it's a fifth dimensional being who just wants to return to its own dimension, higher plane of existence. And to do that, you need the Zohar to leave, basically. He needs the Zohar to be shut down or whatever. My personal theory is that, like, if they ever wanted to tie all this together, they're going to tie it in through the Zohar, through the conduit, whatever you want to call it, in the Xeno games. And it leaving the Xenoblade universe at the end of 2, I think, is the implication for either where it could go to tie in or where it could go to part 3. Because I think Definitive Edition is sort of showing, oh, there's a dimensional rift, and it's causing these other things to appear. And the rift is attracting Telethia, who feed off of ether, and ether is the energy that the Zohar siphons. So there's a lot of things all connecting all together to this one object, right? And I think that's your key to connecting all the universes. It would be something to the effect of, where did the Zohar go, and where did it appear after that? And that's how you would easily connect Saga and Blade. Gears of Square would ever allow, which they wouldn't. But but yeah, like I think there's absolutely a way you can tie these universes together, and it's through the Zohar, because I think they set it up at the end of 2. They blatantly set it up saying, and someone had a theory in one of my streams, my chat, he brought it up, and I think he's pretty dead on. If you remember in the end of 2, when Klaus is talking about all the things that he did, there's 5 rings hovering above him in the room that he sits in. Each ring represents a different Xenoverse. You know, Blade 1, Blade 2, X, Saga, and Gears. Because when he points to Galea, like, you know, like, I'll hope to see you again, he looks up at a specific ring floating around him, implying that those rings are universes. So it seems very blatant that it's exact number of different Xeno universes. So to me, it all kind of flows into this one thing, which is saying that we have this object called the Zohar. It travels, but it comes from a higher plane of existence, and it can open gateways to other dimensions or other parallel universes. That's right there where you do it. However, to be blunt, I don't think anything's going to happen with the Xenosaga games ever again, at least according to Harada. As far as last December, when he flat out said, we got it, we proposed it, it got to a planning stage for a remaster for Xenosaga, and it got turned down because market analysis indicated it would lose money. He said, sorry, it's not happening. So
yeah. And that's why I've always hoped that Nintendo would eventually buy back those games somehow.
Yeah, like, you're right. That's kind of the only way this is going to happen at this point, is if is Nintendo going to be able to buy the Xenosaga and Byte and Kairos, if I might add, can they buy those away from Namco? Because if they could, they could easily do what I believe his name was Chris was asking easily. But again, this all kind of like, as much as the Xenoblades love to dance around copyrights with their terminology for similar things, there's only so far they can go as far as the way copyrights work. So.
Yeah, and I will wrap up the spoiler talk before I put my thumbs back up by saying you don't have to worry about the Xenogears remake, because the Xenogears is just going to be reimagined in one of the upcoming parts of the Final Fantasy VII remake, because Xenogears was originally supposed let's not go down that route.
Here's a fun thing. I don't know if you knew this.
They're already trolling Final Fantasy VII remake, but we can do new stuff. So you know what? Let's just bring back the original line.
Mike, did you know? In the original text where Cloud is suffering Mako poisoning in a wheelchair, he starts mumbling random words. Originally, those words were mistranslated in English, but were later put back into the current versions of Final Fantasy VII. The words he mumbles are the lyrics to the ending song from Xenogears. Cloud even says Xenogears at the end of his mumbling rant when he's in the wheelchair. I am dying to know if that'll end up in the remake.
That'll be amazing. All right, I'm gonna put my thumbs back up now, which means it's safe to come back from spoilers, everyone who's watching and listening. So there you go. That is your answer. Thank you for that question, Chris. We talked a lot about Xenoblade Chronicles in the future of the Xenoblade team at Monolith Soft. But that is not all that's going on at Monolith Soft. In fact, this wasn't even the first new project announced. There was actually one announced a year before this, and that's what I want to switch to next, is their 2017 project. This was revealed in August 2017 via a hiring page they set up. It had some very nice concept art on there. I always point this out. Game Explained did a deep dive and claims that there's a Triforce scene in one of the images of the artwork, one of the walls. But it's like that symbol is not just the Triforce. So like it's not just the Triforce. You go look at the history of that if you need more information. But they described it as an ambitious project that is different from the brand image of what you've come to know from Monolith Soft. And specifically, a lot of the postings were calling for people who had developers' knowledge of real-time combat, medieval fantasy, with Western influences, and a focus on very heavy action-oriented combat system, not a turn-based or even like a system that works on like, like even like Xenoblade's battle system. It was something that was not that. As of 2018, some of the postings were listed as urgent, which led some people to speculate it might not be that. It might be very far along, actually. This is being developed by the First Production Development Team, which also is a team that one of the teams that works on the Xenoblade series. I mean, this Xenoblade studio is in that production team. So I'm kind of curious about your thoughts on this 2017 project. Do you think, obviously, the obvious question, do you think it's still being developed? I mean, it's still listed on their page, so I would say yes. But I mean, do you have any doubts about it? And when do you think, what do you think this game is really going to be about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the art right now. It's been on the website. It really hasn't been updated at all in all this time. And, I know people were speculating that they wanted something like Dark Souls, because the fact that one of the art images has this knight, in this castle area. And then that's honestly kind of what I would be interested in, is Monolith Soft's take on kind of like a Dark Souls game. But really, to my knowledge, there hasn't really been any interview about this project. All we have are these literally 2 pieces of art. It's just really hard to go on, which is leading to speculation that, maybe it got silently canceled or it's not what we think it was. But if I would love to see their take on, just a hard action RPG. More action than the Xenoblade games are. But we just haven't really heard anything about this game at all.
Real time's got me really intrigued, because I always prefer real time personally. I'm like that. I really enjoy real time, but Microsoft's never done real time. I mean, they did Disaster Day of Crisis, I guess. But. Yeah. But yeah, they've never really dabbled in this before, so that's really interesting to me. And I think the thing we talked about earlier is like, yeah, I would love to see what like an character action style combat could be done, applied to their world and storytelling. To me, that'd be fantastic. So this has potential to be really good. There was, I don't know if it may not still be up, but the way back, not when it was first announced, but sometime after it was first announced in August, it was pointed out that they were also looking for artists with a high degree of mechanical knowledge for this action RPG. And it kind of led to me basically calling it, this is the Escaflowne RPG, right? So I'm like, they want mechs and Western medieval fantasy. They want Escaflowne. so for me, I'm like, I have amongst my crowd, I have called it the Escaflowne RPG that they're making. Just as a very simple, I don't know what I'm talking about. And it's funny because it could show up and we may not look anything like what we're thinking. May not have mechs, may not have Western medieval fantasy setting, may have none of that. Who knows? I don't think it would still be up there if it was canceled necessarily. I think it's real. Like if it was just, say secretly just hiring for Xenoblade 1 definitive, or if it was for Zelda, why would they have those separate pages? Why would they have 2 separate recruitment areas if it was going to be for Xenoblade or Zelda? So I don't think it's either of those. I think it is its own thing. And I hope it happens. There's part of me that worries though, because Takahashi has complained in the past about Nintendo has rejected a lot of proposals that were not Xenoblade from them, which gets me a little worried. On a more kind of Nintendo focused front, like I have some, not misgivings, but I have some anxiety, if you will, about the new current president, because he comes from money and he's not, not everyone can be a Wada, I get it, but I do worry about, your CEO comes from a financial background, and I think that can be stifling to a company like Nintendo, who needs that room of creativity to be the best they can be. But then again, like you've also pointed out to me, Mike, like there's a lot of game developers who are high up in like the Nintendo board. So, like Miyamoto and Aonuma and Koizumi and yada yada. So like there are high ranking people at Nintendo, but yeah, I would only worry a little bit where it's like, I hope we're not getting into a point where this project doesn't happen or gets canceled or just never gets really fully greenlit, because Nintendo's never really sure about starting a brand new IP with Monolith Soft, because they don't pull in like the tens of millions of numbers, like some of their heaviest hitters. But yeah, it all goes back to that real time. Gosh darn, am I excited to see a real time combat in a Monolith Soft project? I mean, I guess you could say we got a taste of that with Zelda, but I don't know. Breath of the Wild's combat's kind of ass in my opinion. Not necessarily for the breaking, but just that you can't do much. You just kind of swing and backflip, and that's kind of it. Like I would hope, if going this, like if it is a real time combat game, that there's more to the combat than just yeah.
I mean, it would have to be, because I feel like Monolith Soft with Xenoblade 2 created one of the most complex turn-based battle systems that I've ever seen. And I feel like if they did an action battle system, it'd be one of the most complex action systems we've ever seen, whatever that means. So I'm looking forward to that.
Oh, yeah. There could be some crazy depth there. I will say, to your point about whether or not it's happening, I think the only worrying sign might be you did point out that Takahashi, like a lot of developers, sometimes they say things in the past, they change, but it's also the most recent stuff is usually the best thing to go off of. And as we said, in June of this year, I said one of the big goals at Monolith Soft is to expand the Xenoblade franchise. I do wonder if there's a little bit of the truth that there was a mandate to maybe focus on this. You focus on making either a new Xenoblade game or multiple new Xenoblade games, as well as the amount of work you're doing on Breath of the Wild sequel, which we will get to that soon. But maybe there was a call made that we feel this, you are our studio, we feel this, of all the things you've shown us and pitched, we feel this is the best use of your time. But other than that, we'll leave it at your discretion, how the direction of these things that they would go. So the only thing I could see is maybe like the 2017 project is either, if it could be scrapped. I don't think it is, or it could have been, and I don't think it's been repurposed here. I think they're still working on it. I think it's just taking a while because it's a brand new thing. I think it's taking them a little bit longer because they know how to do Xenoblade so well. They know how to do open world so well. But as you said, they really have done real-time combat on this scale. And as you said, Seth, like the depth, like they're known for having really in-depth battle systems. I think this one's just taking a little bit longer would be my best guess, and what I hope for personally.
How are you gonna hate me for this? But what if they're just holding it back for more powerful hardware?
I mean, if that decision was,
Possible.
I mean, they haven't. The thing is, they haven't promised this game. They haven't said a lot about this game, so I wouldn't feel that disappointed. As long as we get updates on their other projects, the sooner we hear about Breath of the Wild sequel, or we hear about whatever, like what this new Xenoblade project is, I'll feel good. Or they just come and say, "Hey, this project's still alive. It's just being pushed to new hardware, whether that's Switch Pro, whatever that is." I don't have a problem with that, honestly, because this wasn't promised to be on Switch.
Yeah, this is something that's never been technically even announced. So
yeah. I mean, it's always felt strange to me that the studio's done a bunch of interviews since then. It always felt strange to me that nobody has asked about it, and I wonder if it's like that was like one of their mandates. It's like, you just can't ask about this project at all. We just can't talk about it, because it just felt they were willing to even talk about this new Xenoblade project, but they weren't asked about this other project that's been on the website for 3 years. It just always seemed very weird to me.
Or maybe they did, and they're like, I can't talk about it, and so they didn't even bother putting it in.
Usually you don't put a no comment answer. Usually say they wouldn't elaborate on it, but maybe their PR people said, you also can't even mention you asked about that. And I don't know if they would get that strict. That'd be a little bit odd. I think there'd be something up at that point. But I'm also with you. It's obviously we've been in a long summer with the pandemic, so there haven't been opportunities to ask any of the Nintendo developers a lot of things. The communication line there hasn't been as open as it ever has been in the past. And to say in the past, it wasn't even that much. It wasn't really that open compared to some other companies, especially I would say Western companies, with how open they are to having people talk about their games. But I would say like let's wait. Like I mean, it at least has it's still on there. The only reason I think they wouldn't take it down is because they don't want people starting to report headlines. Oh, Monolith Soft just canceled a game. What's going on over there? You know, it could lead to some negative headlines. And I think right now, especially, I feel my gut tells me everything Nintendo's doing right now is part of a very calculated strategy to keep riding the wave of their record success and not upset investors. Not like anything is such like a delay, cancellation that's on the record could look bad for them and affect their like record profits right now, and they just don't want to risk that. And that would be my best guess, honestly.
I mean, if I was an investor, I'd actually be a little annoyed with them right now because I'm like, you're riding high on success. What are you going to do to secure that and whatever? That's a whole nother can of worms.
Oh, we'll get to that at the end. Don't worry. But with this project, I said like I'm very intrigued about this 2007 RPG. I really hope we do get to see it at some point. I hope it's still in development. I would really like to see them, as you said, try their hand at real-time combat.
And to make people upset, I actually hope it stays in the Monolith Soft mold that they currently have and not be a Tales of game. And when I mean Tales, I mean like kind of like, very kind of like linear corridor based. Like there's like this sort of a world map, and like you kind of like the environments are sort of just like run down this hallway to that hallway. Like I actually like the fact that Monolith Soft is they're not open world, but they're large environments. I don't know how there's like a proper term for it because they are linear game. Like the Blade 1 and 2, they're technically linear games.
I mean, it's basically MMO design for single player experience. MMOs have been doing this type of environment design since like for 2+ decades.
Right, but it's also like you go into Bionis' knee. You go into it on one spot, and like the game progresses when you go to the other end on the you just climb up it and go to the other. Like there's this very like A to B, but like that environment between A and B is this giant open enviirment. Like Sartorial Marsh. You come in at one area and you have to get to the other end and climb up the statue.
It's linear progression. It's still a linear progressive game, and you're still going. It's linear progression, but the environment design is not linear. It's still open environments. It's just not open world. I think those two get conflated sometimes.
Because like X is open world. Like X is open world. Like you start the game, you could just swim around the entire game world if you wanted to spend the hours doing that. That's X. Where like X doesn't have necessarily a point A to B necessarily. They kind of try to funnel you into stuff, but it is for the most part an open world design in X. Where Blade 1 and 2 I feel are still linear, but like for this medieval RPG I would hope it stays in that mold, that large open environments, because I think other RPGs kind of got it. Like I only played a little bit of Persona, but like very restrictive there. You can't go a lot of places. Not really the point either. It's not a journey game, right? It's not a game where you travel around the world or anything. And other RPGs do their thing. And I feel like Monolith Soft's the one who's doing the large open environment. You have Final Fantasy 15, but
I mean, that's open world though.
To a point, and then it stops being open world, and like it's kind of held together by duct tape and glue at the end. But
I mean, it's more. I would say as Xenoblade games. I mean, you've even said this before. It's more akin to Final Fantasy 12 or even a Final Fantasy 10, where it's still. For its time, Final Fantasy X, I mean, it's a very linear game, but for its time, its environments were pretty decently sized. Some of their environments are pretty decently sized. But 12 specifically is very large environments.
12 is actually shocking to go back because they actually have all those little PSP Monster Hunter style loading zones, little dots across the ground. Yeah. So there's a lot of that because, the hardware it was made on, right? It's actually kind of interesting to go back and see, like 12 was definitely like felt like this sort of the genesis of where these games went, but like, even now you look back at it and you're like, oh wow, it's actually broken up into a bunch of little zones more than I thought, which is just sort of like a funny passage of time, not really stating one thing one way or the other. But yeah, like they have that one Tales game. It got delayed, and I actually didn't even know that they announced that.
Arise.
Yeah, Tales of Arise. Where it's like I'm actually kind of excited for it, but I actually hope it. See, the thing is, I look at Tales of Arise and go, I hope that's a lot more like a Monolith Soft game than a Tales game. So
asking a
so
lot from the Tales team.
I know, but like which is I guess it's ironic considering that Monolith Soft used to be a Namco studio, but like, and then on the flip side, it's like, hey, I actually hope that this 2017, this I call it the Escaflowne RPG. I hope it's got a fun battle system like the Tales game, but I also hope it still maintains the Monolith Soft map and world design. And I have no reason to think they wouldn't. It would shock me. I would actually be a little surprised if it was like a scaled back, linear, like sort of corridor driven progression, if that's what this RPG turned out to be. Although, let me pose a question to both of you. How would you feel if it had a real-time combat system, but it was like classic Tales, and the game used pre-rendered, right? Or not necessarily linear, but like you go into a battle,
I meant that you not on one plane though, still a 3D environment.
Yeah, like you touch an enemy, loads into a battle.
Gotcha.
But it used pre-rendered backgrounds a la Byte and Kaidos, but of course 1080p, HD era graphics. How would you feel if they threw a real curveball at us and was like, it's a pre-rendered style FMV background game?
I hope they would convey that sooner rather than later. Like once we see this game, that feels like it's a totally different type of game it's aiming for at that point. That feels like we're aiming for almost like a PS1 era style like JRPG at that point, which I have no objection. If you want to make a retro style JRPG that looks fantastic, all the power to them. I would love to see that. Just the concept art and the talk about this project does not give me that vibe at all.
Yeah, me neither. I just kind of want to throw it out.
Yeah, I would have no objection to it. They just need to be clear about it very immediately when they reveal it.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be something very different than what we're talking about, in terms of just this action RPG. I honestly have been hoping it's something more like the Ys games from Falcom.
Yeah.
Where the combat's very fluid, giant bosses, but you still have like a party that you can switch between. And I feel like Monolith Soft could do some crazy stuff with that, but the battles are real time, and something like that. That's kind of what I've been hoping for.
Man.
Yeah, I just want to throw that curveball out because it's not officially announced, so we don't really know. And like we've all built up in our heads what we think it is, and then like what happens if we get to the scenario and it's like, oh, it's nothing like what we thought it was. Oh, okay. I don't know. Just kind of curious
for
how
sure.
you guys feel about that.
I could see them, honestly. I could see it. You keep throwing out Souls out there like that because that was brought up. That was brought up as something that it was being compared to. I wouldn't be surprised if they were also catching a bit at the time the Witcher fever for like Witcher 3 being so renowned and so critically acclaimed. That like, oh, why don't we like make a game that's more like the style of that with that like real-time combat. I mean, personally, I'd like to see them do something more like their take on a Monster Hunter, but like an open world Monster Hunter, and not like hunting dinosaurs, but like fantasy creatures, stuff that like maybe involving some element that they're better at with their open world design. I think that'd be a pretty cool concept.
I want it to be Ys 8. I mean, Stealth said it, so now it's in my head now. I'm like, I just want. Now that's all I want. I just want Ys 8, but with a giant environment, no loading zones. Like just Ys 8.
Yeah, I mean, I just watched the trailer for Ys 9 that's coming soon, and that's like what I feel Monolith Soft. They could just make it bigger and grander with giant bosses and do everything like that, just on a crazy scale.
Yeah. I'm really conflicted about Ys 9. Apparently the PS4 version of that game only runs at 30 frames. On the PS4, I'm like, what?
You made me think of the Lost in Time. Where the hell is it? The Grand Blue RPG. Like the platinum game.
Someone brought that up.
Where'd it go?
What happened to that game?
Where'd it go?
Okay, we want to talk about a game that definitely is having some development troubles. like they kicked, like Platinum got kicked off or ended their contract, whatever, and then they're like, okay, well, I guess the scope got super big, so they're gonna finish. What happened? Gone.
Just want to play.
That is disappeared completely.
But
maybe Monolith Soft was brought in to finish it.
That would be funny. So, 2017 RPG, we really don't know much about it. And again, a lot of it is speculative, so I obviously the real-time combat and the Western fantasy focus is pretty much all we have to go on besides the concept art. I want to get that out of there because that was like the first one they announced. It's been the longest that we've gone without having an update from that. So I wanted to have that talk about whether or not we even still think it was happening or not. So I thought that was a pretty good conversation about it. But
and make it play like you say. Make it just like that. Parries
so
and
we're basically telling all of you at Monolith, make it play like easy, and you will have, and make it open world, no load times, and you got the perfect solution for it.
Yeah, right there. Make it look like your games and make it play like you say.
I want to move on to the Breath of the Wild 2 team at Monolith Soft. This is probably their third major project we know about that they're actively involved in on a large scale project. This team is part of the second production team, which is based out of the main Tokyo studio as well. They are specifically the only team that works on other Nintendo IPs that's not part of their asset assist team that works on a whole bunch of things like Splatoon and other games like that as like asset
Animal Crossing,
thank you, as their asset assistant. This is a team that's like this is like a real deal team. We talked a little about their hiring. They began hiring more staff for Breath of the Wild past few years. Like March of 2019, there was a big hiring spree for that. They have just been hiring a lot of people, ramping up for this team, yet still pumping out these other games. And a lot of these positions, we were talking a little bit before we started recording about the positions they've been hiring for, kind of tip their hand a little bit about not just like the level of involvement, but like what they're actually doing. Going beyond just helping with open world design, this time references to, event planners, scenario planners, potentially leading to like having some story involvement, to positions referencing stuff about potentially dungeon design and maybe the return of proper dungeons. So we've already seen Breath of the Wild 2 at E3 over a year ago. We have not seen or heard anything since. But yet it's like every other week we're like, oh, we're going to get it up. Maybe we're going to update to Breath of the Wild 2. So let's talk about Monolith Soft's involvement in Breath of the Wild 2, what you hope they're going to bring to the table, and how important you think they're going to be to the sequel's development this time around.
I think they're going to be very important. When you look at Breath of the Wild, the original, you can feel Monolith Soft all throughout that game, especially in the world design, in some of the town design, and kind of my hope for Breath of the Wild 2 is, if they do bring back big dungeons, I'm hoping that Monolith Soft has a hand in crafting, like the look of those dungeons, just a gigantic building or castle or whatever it is, that they have a hand in, designing the world again, wherever the world is, if it's the same, we don't even know if it's the same Hyrule, just redesigned. We have no idea. But I just hope that Monolith Soft continues to have a hand in, building the world. That's kind of the most, dungeons in Zelda games are the most important aspects of the games to me. And while the shrines in Breath of the Wild were good, I just want some just crazy big multi-floor dungeons that look crazy and just gigantic bosses too.
Makes me think about real quick to me in Breath of the Wild, the original one, the Hyrule Castle felt like the most traditional style dungeon. Their take on it. I don't know this offhand. Maybe either you do, or maybe it's just not known. It'd be great to ask if it's not known. If Monolith Soft had any involvement with the Hyrule Castle portion specifically, because if they did, I absolutely want them to make the dungeons for Breath of the Wild 2.
I think they had to have involvement with that. Monolith Soft is critically important. Breath of the Wild does not exist without Monolith Soft. 60% of Monolith Soft worked on Breath of the Wild. The other 40% worked on Xenoblade 2. So Xenoblade 2 is the product of 40% of their workforce, and Breath of the Wild was 60% combined with Nintendo EPD. But it was their engine. It was their technical expertise and know-how to make the game that it was. So there is no Breath of the Wild without Monolith Soft, and I don't think a lot of people know that, because I've even heard it brought up like, does Nintendo really need Monolith Soft? You know, I'm like, that game doesn't exist without them, because and you probably know this pretty well, Mike. Like Nintendo's Zelda team has never been that big. Like not in terms of like, because when I say big, I mean like it's never been like Ubisoft, you know, Assassin's Creed style size. You know, there's never been that many people. On a Zelda, like there's outsourcing that goes into a lot of Zelda games that has been going on for a while, but like the main core Zelda team has never been huge. None of the EPD teams, to my knowledge, formerly EAD, none of them are actually that enormous.
Yeah. I think the Mario team might actually be the bigger team overall.
Yeah.
Now that I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, they've never been that huge, so they had absolutely no idea how to do open world Zelda when they did it, and they needed Monolith because Monolith had basically done that twice with Xenoblade and Xenoblade X. They needed their engine and they need all their know-how. So on as far as like they're critically important to the current style of Zelda games they're making. But I all of Monolith Soft on Breath of the Wild 1 was for world design, you know, programming, all technical stuff, right? They didn't have any real hand in any of the managerial decision-making stuff or any of the, not really a lot of design, if you will. It was mostly just like, we need you to make this world. And then like a lot of the decisions as far as progression and all that other stuff, that came from, you know, Nintendo EPD. So as far as part 2 though, it's interesting because like, as it was pointed out, like, they talked about having level designers and like I don't know if it said specifically, but the wording on the different positions they were looking for, that were not only were they hiring all the positions that they used for the first Breath of the Wild, they were looking to fill in new positions for the sequel, and that included like basically dungeon designers, more or less. I don't know if they said specifically dungeon designer, but I think it might have even been something like that. But they're talking about, they want artists, they want character designers, they want scenario writers, they wanted different types of scenario, quest line scenario, and they wanted mainline scenario writers. They wanted, you know, main character designs and stuff like that. It's like crazy amount of more stuff. They wanted like project managers, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're directing the game. That's more just on their end. But you know, they're talking about cutscene direction, cutscene artists and stuff like that. So I don't know, like you might have more to say on this than me, but it's like Nintendo's always been so dang gun shy about really embracing high production value as far as cutscenes, voice acting, whatever goes in any Nintendo game, let alone Zelda. Even though Zelda always seems to scream out, it wants to have a big, grandiose storyline with lots of cutscenes and voice acting and whatnot. But like Nintendo's always like, but then you're hiring all these people for that, and I can't help but wonder if Nintendo looked at what happened with Xenoblade 2, you know, let alone the first game definitive, and go, maybe we take some of like the crazy amount of work, like, you know, Nintendo might always feel like, well, we don't know how to do big cutscenes and long-winded stuff like that, but you guys sure do. Maybe they've decided, you know what, you guys have a lot of experience doing cutscenes and animations specifically for cutscenes and dialogue and yada yada. Maybe they're dipping their toe more into that, or maybe they're asking Monolith Soft to come on and say like, okay, you guys know what you're doing as far as these heavy narrative presentation side of things go. How about you do that for Zelda? Like, I don't know. It's a weird thing because it's always felt like Nintendo's been gun shy. I don't know how you feel about it, Mike, but that's kind of what I'm reading. That's just, when I look at like the hires, I'm just like, maybe that's what they're going for.
I mean, yeah, I will agree. I feel like they obviously are more involved this time, and I think I don't want to make the fall into the pitfall of making assumptions based on like partial information. My best read of the situation is that yes, Monolith is definitely more involved and has more potentially a creative voice and creative input in this sequel, but I don't want to say that definitively until I like something's either shown or said about it, because that could also set me up for disappointment when it's like, no, they really were just helping in the same capacity again, and like we added dungeons, but like we also ran into some issues. We just need them help with the maybe they're just more again technical support, but they had no creative input on, like, we're talking about the story direction, even the atmosphere, design of the dungeons. No, they just gave them the blueprint. This is what we want. Make it real for us. So I don't want to overreach here, but my desire is that they are being leveraged more than that. I think it would be I think it'd be kind of dumb of Nintendo to not leverage those talents.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Breath of the Wild is the best-selling Zelda game. It's undisputed what a success that was, and who helped them with that is Monolith Soft. I'd like to think like a good feeling was kind of formed when they made that game, and they saw the praise for it and everything like that. So, I'd be shocked if they, moved in like if they gave them less stuff to do.
Yeah.
It just wouldn't make much sense to me, just because that game was such a success. And, they touted, the limited voice acting that there was in Breath of the Wild as some big new feature. And I think people did like the voice acting in Breath of the Wild. I thought that was pretty successful,
Yeah.
generally. So I do think, like, they're not going to pull back on anything that they did.
Yeah, I think, and specifically to your point about the production values of some of the things that maybe Nintendo has historically not cared as much as maybe some other developers, I do think if they're smart, they saw some of the discussion around, we want more. More characters should be talking. Do more VO. Like put more budget into it. The soundtrack. Oh, yeah, the sound, we get it. You went for this minimalist sound design, but like when we actually listen to the soundtrack, there's a lot of tracks, but it's like I feel like I didn't hear a lot of them very frequently. It's Xenoblade is the antithesis of Breath of the Wild. It's basically these sweeping. We talk so much about the music, how important it is to make you feel about it. I'd rather have that over the direction Breath of the Wild. I don't want Breath of the Wild again. I don't want that sound design again. It was nice one time. I want them to have some sweeping song when I'm riding across the field or exploring a cave, like haunting music, or I'm in a dungeon. Those dungeons better have amazing themes. Even if it's subtle, it needs to be there. Something has to be there. And I think they would be... I'm hoping they saw that, and I'm hoping that's... maybe not everyone agrees with this, but me personally, I hope they saw some of that and said, you know what, we can ramp that up. We can spend a little bit more budget on this, because I honestly, to put this back to the point of origin for where I think where this discussion, these thoughts I have about this game, I think originally they were just trying to get Breath of the Wild right. I think that was the most important thing, was to get open world Zelda done right. And that was the most important, was the environment designs, progression, how, and like the weapons and like combat, like they were working all these things. But the most important part was we need to make open world Zelda feel good. And they nailed that, in my opinion. Now that they know how to do that, and thanks to Monolith Soft's assistance, now they can start to work to flesh out other elements that we've come to love about Zelda and want to see come back in like more items. We'd like to see more items. We'd like to see dungeons return. Like there's a whole laundry list of things. I think now they can focus on this, which may also be why this is taking a little bit longer, is because it's not as simple as making a direct sequel. Then maybe they're being way more ambitious with this.
Yeah, you're right. And as good as Breath of the Wild is, and it is a great game. It's also a game where it's a template where you could see how they could expand on it, how they could add so much more to it. And that's just on a gameplay level as well, but like even more like also presentation, where it's like you think about this the forest temple, right? That music is like that haunting, scary music, and it's like you could just listen to that music and you'd be like, oh gosh, I remember that place. And that's what I really want with Breath of the Wild too, is that I want dungeons, but I would want them to be actually tied to the environment. You know what I mean? Like how like Zelda's castle, Hyrule Castle is like part of the environment and whatnot. Even sort of the extent that the Yiga clan hideout, like it's built into the rocks, you know, it's kind of like it's like a little mini dungeon, but it works. But like bring that back, make it part of the environment. Don't make it the same room, because like the shrines all had the same look and motif, and it was just kind of like it's very, very boring. And I don't need 100 shrines. I don't need 100 dungeons. I just need about like 8 to 10 great dungeons. That's all I really need, right? And
Yeah.
And I want them. Yes, I do want them to bring the music back. I am no fan of Breath of the Wild's direction, like, because there's good music in the game, but it feels very few and far between. And the most thing I ever hear is just those few piano keys at the start of a day, ding 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 ding. It's like that is the musical motif of that game. And so I now go ahead, Sal.
Yeah, I mean, the place where I was like, or I always think about is, in the desert, in Breath of the Wild, which is such an enormous area, and there's sandstorms, and I always just imagine, you go into the desert, there's a sandstorm, and then all of a sudden you just see this gigantic temple, just in the desert. And the other thing is, not only were the insides of the shrines the same, but the outsides of the shrines were the same too, and they weren't really interesting. They looked like pea pods or something. I don't even know what they looked like, but it wasn't grandiose. It wasn't like, this gigantic building. You're like, oh, I'm going to spend like 5 hours in here. There was no feeling like that. And that's kind of what I do want from the dungeons. And I agree. They need to feel like they're part of the environment where, okay, you go to the snowy mountains and there's, you might not see it when you're at the bottom of the mountain, but when you get to the top, you just see this enormous ice tower or something cool. Like
a mansion hidden on the side of the snowy mountain. One of the best levels.
Yeah, but just I mean, honestly, it's not going to be that hard to improve on the shrines in terms of design. It's almost impossible to make it worse, but they can make it better just by coming up with something different.
Yeah, I think the challenge is going to be, because we take it for granted in older Zelda games, a lot of dungeons are tied around the item design. And the older dungeons were, here's a key item, it's used to solve key puzzles in this dungeon, and usually used in defeating the boss. That was something they tried to shed, and it's very obvious. Sorry to point this out if it's so obvious to everyone else, but the reason you got all the abilities, the items at the beginning of the game, is because they needed to know what the player had access to, because the shrines, they do not rival the scale and atmosphere that we're talking about, but in terms of ingenuity, in terms of what the actual puzzles are in there, they're pretty damn clever in my opinion. And in fact, they also using the use of physics-based puzzles, I think having that freedom allowed them to go a little bit wild with that. The challenge now, when we're asking them to go back this other way, is can you bring that ingenuity back into traditional Zelda dungeon designs, because they need to feel unique. They need to fit a specific environment design. They, like, if you have a tower, it can't be this wide like labyrinth. It has to be vertical all of a sudden. On top of that, the breaking the rule of the original game, you had all the items at the beginning. Those are the only items you get in the game. So now we know how you're gonna be able to traverse in any part. What if that's a big thing for them to figure out, is now we have, like, let's say they add in a hook shot, like, or any amount of new items. Now they have to account for that at every part of the game. How do you keep the game feel? They have to ensure the game feels still open, and you have the freedom to really go anywhere and not feel restrictive. Like, we don't want a whole section of the area like, oh, you don't have the hook shot, you can't go over to this area. People will be right on their ass saying, oh man, this is old Zelda design, get rid of this. So, like, they have to find a way to balance that and make it still feel. I think they do. I think they cannot gate off stuff like that. Go ahead, Seth.
I mean, I feel like you can do that within the dungeons and, the world, because you can climb everything. You can pretty much get anywhere, but I just feel like there are ways they can manipulate the dungeon designs where, you can't climb in the dungeon or something.
Yeah.
Where, you'd have to use the items.
That,
yeah. Kind of like not a link between worlds, but I feel like there's a way where you can keep it open. You can keep it open in the world, but still make interesting dungeons with items.
Yeah,
well, I think it kind of backfires a little bit by having everything available at the beginning, because then the game just becomes a physics-based sandbox simulator. And one of my big issues with Breath of the Wild, for me personally, was that you have a great map, but there's very little reason to explore most of it. Like, there's a lot of that map that looks cool, but there's not much there. There's a shrine over there to get another spirit orb or whatever. Like, I think having items that require you to go to certain areas helps with enticing you to explore the world. Like that's actually kind of one thing I missed a little bit in Breath of the Wild, was just the fact that I could go everywhere. What am I going to find? Not a lot. You'll find a shrine, you'll get something to like expand your stamina a little bit or whatever. Which to me, it was just like, I don't feel like it was a good enough reward. Like I almost want like there were the weird labyrinths, which were cool because they gave you a piece of the Berserker armor, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that was a better incentive for me to go seek this thing out so that I could get this cool new armor set. But ultimately, the cool new armor set, most of the time, the armor set's kind of whatever in Breath of the Wild. Like the only thing that's really important is, does it make you hot or does it make you cold? Can you withstand those temperatures or whatever? And it's like, oh, just go buy the headband and that'll solve everything, in the shop. So for me, it's like I actually wouldn't mind it if parts of the world were somewhat gated off. Like you needed the hook shot to get to this plateau area above somewhere else. It'd be a reason to it's a reason to explore or an enticing thing to come back to, because there was a bit of a lack of like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to see what's at the top of this mountain? Like it's going to be a shrine, or it's going to be a weapon that breaks in 10 hits, like whatever.
Or a Korok. You didn't find those enticing?
Or Korok, yeah. You can go find 900 Koroks and like get nothing for your efforts after a certain point. So it's like,
I don't disagree. I don't disagree with you, Simmons. I think I meant like entire sections of a map locked out. I think like something like on the scale like that Dark Forest where you needed lights. Like that's something like okay, you need a certain item. We've also talked about this in the past, Simmons, you and I, about how there could be dungeons have multiple paths through them. You always can get through a dungeon, but the more gear you have or items, you face a path of least resistance. Like the hookshot lets you go up to an upper level, which is a little bit easier than if you go through the lower levels, which is like more brute forcing it. So there are definitely ways. The point I'm trying to make here is you alluded to A Link Between Worlds stealth. And they tried this a little bit in 2D with the rental system and having dungeons where you don't necessarily need one item to solve it. You could go use a different set of items to go through it a variety of ways potentially. But that's 2D game design. That's like still top down, like you're only worrying about this. This open world design, I think it's more of a challenge because you're basically having to still nail that feeling and that having that diversity, but an open world design. And it's borderline like balancing like Metroidvania style stuff but also not quite Metroidvania. It's like, how do you one up Metroidvania where it's like you're not locked off from anywhere, but like you have multiple paths you can go at any time based on the items you have. I think it's a pretty drastically different design of a different type subset of open world that I don't think games do particularly well. It works well. 2D games have done it excellent. And I think, and like there have been some 3D games like Metroid Prime that have done 3D Metroidvania pretty well, but I think it thrives in 2D. And I don't think what we're talking about really necessarily translates into that very well. I think we're asking for something a little bit more potentially, and I would argue that's why it might be taking a little bit longer for them to figure this out.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the real key, isn't it? Are they going to give you the items that you will use, that you will need? Are all the items you need given to you in the first 3 hours again? Or are they going to try to do specific items that you acquire later on through the game? So like they do end up, certain things do end up becoming impossible to climb or gated off or whatever. That's a real interesting thing. I don't know which way they're going to go on it. I don't feel one way or the other.
To be honest,
I don't feel we have a gauge on it.
Yeah, I still think best case scenario, you're still going to get just a group of essential tools that you're going to get at the beginning of the game. I think they're not going to completely break away from that. What I think they will do, if what we're talking about, the best case scenario I could hope for, is they have a second tier set of items that are quote unquote the optional items. So they design the entire game around you will always have these 4 or 5 basic tools, weapons, whatever they want to call them in this one. But these optional items will be available and they can offer you alternative means through either world progression, like traversal, and or dungeon progression. That's like my best hope. I don't think they're going to have like 20 unique items that are scattered around Hyrule and you don't get anything at the beginning. I think that's insanity. Yeah. That game will take like 10 years to make.
But what do you think about this? Obviously, this is the same link do you think he's going to start with the same 4 tools that he had in Breath of the Wild, and then they're just going to add to it? I think he might just start with those.
I think so. I think it would be nice to have that. Maybe add like one extra one. It's like, oh, not Impa, the young girl. I forget her name. The Sheikah girl.
I know who you're talking
like
about.
one extra. Basically, gives you like one extra one. Oh, here's one extra new one you start with or whatever. Here you go, new ability, and go.
I'm gonna guess this: the game will start in a dungeon, and in the dungeon you will lose your 4 core abilities, and just within that first dungeon, they will reteach you how to use the Sheikah slab abilities just to get you up to speed in the dungeon. It's also a way to introduce. This game has dungeons now. So we're going to start in a dungeon, and you're going to go through like dungeon-like environments and keys and puzzles, and you're going to get your things back. And so that by the time you actually start the game proper and go out into the open environment, you'll have your Sheikah slate back. We've retaught you how to use it, and we've also introduced you to the mechanic of those new dungeons. I think that's how this game's going to start. And I'm pulling all that because the think of that trailer was not just made in a bubble like what we saw of the game last year. I think there are implications as to where the game's going within that teaser we got. I don't think it was just made for fun for nothing.
Yeah. I agree with that.
Very rarely has a Zelda game ever debuted with footage that didn't have implications for how the game was going to work. Every first Zelda teaser always seems to have something where maybe they don't follow through on everything 100%, but you look back and they heavily implied what they were doing, where they were going with the game, as long as it's like actual in-game graphics. And honestly, I honestly think they're going for a more story-driven thing. I think narration and presentation is actually going to be a much larger focus on this title. I don't think they would have done the things they did in that teaser if there wasn't going to be more focus on presentation narration. And I do think there's a lot of people have sort of rumored it, and some people have claimed it as fact, or like, I've got my uncle works in Nintendo, but I actually do think there's going to be a whole underground aspect to this game. Like there was that one really frame that was like a flash shot of like an old school style Zelda 1 dungeon entrance looking thing in that teaser. And I think there's going to be I think dungeons will be like mostly underground as far as my guess would go. I think you are going to do a lot of that. I think that's actually part of the game, is going into forgotten, buried aspects of Hyrule or whatever. And I also think that chunks of Hyrule are going to be lifted into the air. And I think those are going to become dungeons, so to speak, where you have to go up there. And that's how they separate it from the rest of the game world. There's all speculation on my part, but I'm just looking at that and I'm going like, this is probably what they're doing. They'll have dungeons, but they're going to separate them by being, they're either underground or in the sky. And you have to literally leave the game map zone to go to that. So you can't just knock a tree over, hit it while it's frozen in time, and then Dragon Ball launch yourself on a log into the middle of the dungeon. Like they're like, we need to make sure people can't do this. So I think that's how that's gonna flow. What are your feelings though, as far as continuing a storyline based on Breath of the Wild? Like, I'm curious how you guys feel about this, specifically in regards to like the last game, continuing from that point.
I do think it's interesting that they're bringing back. They allude to the fact that we're going to see Ganondorf, actual Ganondorf. Not like this beast. And I'm very interested to see how they're going to characterize Ganondorf, or kind of bringing it back to Monolith Soft. I'd love like a Monolith Soft kind of take on Ganondorf, just a more complex villain. Maybe one you even play at certain points. I'm not even sure. We really don't know how much of like the Breath of the Wild world we're going to see in this. If literally it's going to be the same exact world, that's not as interesting to me. I'm just more interested to see like how they flesh out Ganondorf, because honestly, I don't think he's ever been super interesting. I'd like to see kind of a more complex character there.
I'm just happy that what they've shown so far makes it pretty clear that it's a direct continuation. I tend to generally appreciate them continuing, especially with the characters. Same Link and Zelda going into the. I mean, I'm assuming same Link and Zelda. I mean, they could just.
Yeah.
It's not the same Link and Zelda. Sure, who knows what they could do? But assuming it is,
It could be 100 years later.
yeah,
As always.
it's their kids. No, it's nothing's going to be done about your kids. No. If assuming it's true, then it's nice. I like that. I like seeing characters being able to go through multiple games and seeing them, seeing their characters develop. But also, yeah, as you said, I will be a little bit bummed out if it's literally the same Hyrule and they try and do a new twist on it. I'd like them to do something a little bit more new with that. But at the same time, to work this back a little bit to Monolith Soft's involvement here, a lot of this discussion about like the possibilities we want to see here, I'm kind of curious. We've been very positive and we're very optimistic about what they could do. I want to ask you to repurpose this question to ask you too about, do you have any concerns about letting Monolith Soft have more creative control? Like, is there some aspect of a Zelda game that you think maybe Monolith Soft might not be the best to do? Obviously, they're a very talented studio, and you want to say let them try anything. But is there something you'd rather trust the Zelda team proper, like Aonuma or Fujibashi's director? But let's just say like under Aonuma's team, the veteran team there. Would you rather see them kind of be in charge of some aspect that you would prefer Monolith Soft to maybe stay away from, or would have concerns if Monolith Soft was put in charge of it?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily want Monolith Soft to handle the puzzles of, a Zelda dungeon. And, not that they can't, but they don't have a ton of experience doing those kind of complex, multi-floor, item-based, super puzzles. That I would probably want the Zelda team to do. I might want Monolith Soft to design the dungeons, but have the Zelda team do everything else inside of them,
Yeah. I guess puzzles would be basically it. I was like, you were pointing out, I'm like, I don't know. Like, because like, I think back to like, I mean, Monolith Soft did actually do a lot of technical like engine work on Skyward Sword, but like that was still mostly like Nintendo EAD at the time. And I'm like, I'm thinking back, like, I don't know, like Zelda team has been sort of hit or miss for me for a long time. As much as it's my favorite franchise, but, yeah, I guess puzzle design's not really ever been their forte. They never really done anything with puzzles in a Monolith Soft game. It doesn't like, some people's like, oh, I hope they don't introduce anything dumb like field skulls. I'm like, of course not. I'm like, nobody likes those. And yeah, I'm not saying like I hope this one terrible aspect from this one game is not in Zelda. Like, why would it be? It was never in it, but like nothing like that. Like as far as just sort of general, there's anything I don't know if I trust them. It'd probably be puzzle design. That's basically it. I'd be a lot more trusting. On the flip side of this, I don't know if maybe that was your follow up, but I was like, on the flip side, I actually hope Monolith Soft is actually given way more control of the narrative after especially after Torna. After going through Torna and then seeing how that like flowed all the way with 2, I'm like, please let Monolith Soft do the storyline, because like you said stuff like Ganondorf's never really been given any sort of like, he's had a tiny bit, but it's like there's always been this potential to make something really great with Ganondorf's character and everything surrounding his character, his motivation, his storyline. There's always been potential there. Like the seed was planted there, and then it always seems like it was never quite given water to blossom or whatever. Like it kind of goes back to an interview Chris Kohler had with Koizumi, where like he had all these ideas for the story and then Miyamoto kept shutting them all down and like trying to remove them. And it's like, where I always feel like, there's always been this great potential to tell a really engaging, a complex narrative, but they never want to do it because I feel like Nintendo's probably afraid of having a complex narrative in there. Like, the implications of what goes on with Torna and with specifically like Jin and Amalthus in 2, and it's like I would love something that sort of complex to go into a Zelda storyline, but I feel like there are like for whatever reason, either from fear or just just general, I don't want to know, don't want to do it, whatever. Like, it never seems to happen with the Zelda team. Like, yeah, like I don't know, like. But let's go back to the original question. Yeah, puzzle design, I'd say probably keep that to the classic Zelda team, as far as that goes.
I'm with you. Maybe Monolith can, but I mean, despite the problems we brought up with the shrines, puzzles weren't my problem with them.
No, just
me personally, I really like the puzzles, so I feel like let the team behind that keep doing their job on that. The only other area I might be a little bit hesitant to let Monolith run wild with, the key items. Obviously, they make great RPG battle systems, turn-based. I mean, on a cooldown system. I don't know how they would fare. Maybe I'm missing a game they've worked on in the past that illustrates they do a very good job on this. But item functionality, using it in real time. It's also tied to puzzles, but it's also tied to the puzzle element. But like the item design, item usage, item functionality, item integration, I feel like the Zelda team has done a very good job of this in the past. It's one of their bread and butter things. I obviously consulting with Monolith, like, hey, maybe they have a cool idea that we didn't think of, but I don't think just putting them in charge of it would probably be for the best at this point.
Right.
Would be the only thing I would add.
That's a good point.
Yeah. But so obviously Monolith has a team heavily involved with Breath of the Wild sequel. Hopefully it is not too much longer till we get to see the next update on this. Potentially maybe see some gameplay at some point. But those are the three big projects that Monolith Soft has publicly revealed, but it's not all their studios and not everything that they have available that's out there right now. We just don't know what these other studios are working on potentially, and they might not even be working on something that's that big. In fact, one of them never really works on anything original, as we talked about. I'll skip ahead to them. The Kyoto Studios, who we were referencing earlier. They just do support for a bunch of Nintendo titles. We talked about Splatoon and Animal Crossing. The most recent one was Animal Crossing New Horizons. They finished that up earlier this year. But yeah, they're only known for working in support role, but we don't know what their current project is, what they're supporting next. A lot of people would let you believe that it's Splatoon 3 probably, or a new Splatoon project, because it'd be insane if Nintendo is not working on some kind of Splatoon-related content with how popular that series is, especially in Japan. But we don't really need to speculate about that. I just wanted to point out that that's what we were talking about. That's what we do. The one that is the biggest question mark, what the heck are they doing? Like, no idea. Even more mysterious than the 2017 RPG is their recently opened Osaki studio, opened in Tokyo in 2019. It was announced with their other studio that was shortly closed thereafter. I'm forgetting starts with an I, the studio that they opened and then subsequently just like closed, I believe.
Yeah, that whole thing seemed to me like, oh, they must have had some problem with the landlord or something. Like,
yeah, because like one that closed, because it was like
opened it, closed it, and then like they opened another one right after. I'm like, okay, something. It was probably just shifted.
But the Osaki studio is still open, as far as we know. There's been no announcements. Like, Game Watch hasn't done any reports that's closed or anything like that. We just have no idea what they're working on. Whether it's asset support or they're working on a new project, it's a big mystery. So there could be a potentially fourth. I don't know if either of you has more insight than I do, but when I was looking it up a few weeks ago, it was just a big question mark.
I think everything in Tokyo works on the Tokyo projects. Like, and they probably is working on one of the three. I'm going to say not Zelda. Their main office in Meguro, I'm going to guess that's Xenoblade and Zelda. I don't remember what I was saying, but they have a whole floor dedicated to themselves there in that building. We'll go into how I know this, but like, but they have a whole floor of a pretty sizable, but not in pretty sizable building. So like that's like what their main office is, and it's like the whole floor is dedicated to them. And I'm gonna guess that the others Tokyo studios are probably working on that medieval action RPG is going to be my guess, because I think Nintendo headquarters are going to want their biggest main headquarters office, they're going to want them on Zelda, and Takahashi's probably going to want to be close to the Xenoblade team, considering that's his baby, right? So I think the other satellite studios, they might help out with Zelda and Xenoblade, but if I were to guess what any of the other Tokyo studios are doing, offices or whatever, however you want to classify it, I'm going to guess they're working on that medieval RPG, the medieval fantasy action RPG. That'd be my guess, because I think Nintendo, just being Nintendo, they're going to want to keep everything with Zelda very, very close to the chest, right? Like Kyoto works on it, and then Monolith Soft headquarters works on it. No one else. They don't want any other emails or assets being shared or swapped around, or, I mean, their main office is right next to a train station. Like someone just kind of walks out and accidentally just hops on a train and drops the folder with info on it or whatever. Like remember that incident where that guy found out about like Shadow of the Tomb Raider because someone in Montreal was on a subway and he just had his laptop open. Like, I think Nintendo's like, we don't want any of that to happen. Like, we know, like, no potential mess ups here. Like, I'm going to say they probably want to keep it like, they're probably already gun shy about like Monolith Soft being in Tokyo and they're in Kyoto. They're probably already sort of like scared about that already. So they're probably just like, as few different offices working on Zelda as possible. Like, try to keep it locked down to just Kyoto, just Monolith main headquarters. That'd be my guess. So as far as the other offices go, I don't think they're going to be working on Zelda, and I kind of doubt they'd be working on Xenoblade, but maybe.
Yeah, the non-disclosure agreements on Zelda 2 are probably insane, and would, if you broke it, would have like 25 years jail time. Just. Based on Nintendo. And I do agree that they would be that paranoid. I mean, we've seen how paranoid they are about Smash Brothers, and, the fact they don't want any information there, spilled. It's very secretive. And, Zelda 2 is probably their biggest project. I assume that almost nobody knows about it. Obviously, Takahashi said that, their main production team, half of the team was working on Xenoblade Definitive Edition. The other half of the team was working on this brand new game, the Xenoblade game. Yeah. And then, the third team was working on both. So, I assume that the new Xeno project is canceled. I assume, like what you're thinking, that someone has to be working on this action RPG. It has to be somebody. So I'm thinking it's probably this new studio that they
Gotcha.
kind of whipped up.
Someone broke down the credits for Definitive pretty good and actually pointed out where they're like half of the people in pretty much most positions for Xenoblade 2 worked on Definitive, and half were missing, just not in the credits, right? Yeah. So I'm like, where are they? They were off. To me, I'm like, that was very obvious. They were on the Xenoblade, let's call it the Xenoblade 3 team, or maybe even the other action RPG team. And then they were saying like there were a lot of new names in Definitive who haven't been on any Monolith Soft project, someone who traced every name down. And so it was really interesting that like Definitive Edition was not made by a lot of people, and about half of that team was brand new, and only about half of the 40% of Xenoblade 2 worked on Definitive. So it was actually, I don't think Definitive was a huge project for them. Like, I know Takahashi said like, oh, we treated it like it was a full brand new game. I'm like, no, you didn't.
Yeah, I mean, they even said that, they could have made Future Connected bigger, but that would have required them to take more people off of that third team.
Yes.
And they just didn't want to do it, which is fair, if they wanted to really focus on that new game. So I think that's what, I mean, they wanted to do that in-house. Like, they were very passionate about redoing Xenoblade, making it that flagship RPG that, now, okay, the Switch version is the version, and now they can move on. They wanted to do that in-house, but they didn't want to put everybody on it. I think that was clear.
Yeah, and they even said that like we updated some textures, but like unfortunately some textures were just up-resed. And you could tell, you look at the game and like it's mostly the Wii game. Every texture got touched up, but some were redone and some were just up-resed. And like I think Digital Foundry pointed out how like the character models are actually the same on the Wii. The only thing they changed were the heads and the hands. for all the main character models. So reality is like actually much of that game is mostly just the Wii game up-resed. It actually, you'll notice that really hard. Say you run around the Machina Forest and then you like literally switch, switch your game over to Xenoblade 2 on the same system, and you're like, oh yeah, wow, actually, yeah, it is just the Wii game. Like there actually isn't like just the amount of polygons and the amount of just effects and stuff going on actually isn't all that, which actually speaks volumes to how great the game looked on the Wii, but it was not a full top to bottom remake. It was not Final Fantasy VII. It was mostly the Wii game, and they changed the heads and the hands.
It wasn't a Shadow of the Colossus treatment.
Right. It was not Shadow of the Colossus. It was not a top to bottom remake. It was done to make the game look and run as best as the Wii game could on current generation. And I think it was good because they've got a flowing narrative going. So I think that's obvious. But yeah, I don't. I think he's just saying that to be nice to the team that made Definitive. But I'm like, I don't think a lot of time. And here's the other thing we were talking about earlier, Mike. Xenoblade still came out right in the middle of this pandemic, right? Which to me feels like, I feel like Definitive Edition was probably done earlier, way earlier than when it came out. Like it probably was finished like at the start of the year, January, February, maybe even March, or at the latest. I think the game was done, and they pretty much just like, okay, held on to it, put it out at the end of May, just for timing purposes. But it's like, I think Monolith Soft was finito with that project probably by the start of this year. So
that's been the case with a lot of the Switch like deluxe editions. Nintendo holds on to those where they can slot them into certain gaps in the lineup. There have been rumors that Pikmin 3 Deluxe was actually ready for April, but they had to hold that back until October for a different game that got delayed. So, I do agree that it was probably mostly done well before when it actually released.
Yeah, because it did not suffer any to me, because they never announced a release date until May, but like it didn't have a date until then, and it didn't get pushed back. It still came out within the first half of this year. So I'm like, that game was probably done and dusted, while ago, which means I think all the more time they've probably been working quietly on Zelda and through Xenoblade 3 and the action RPG. I think they're farther. Here's the thing. I personally think they're farther along on all three of their other games than we think, but that does not mean they're ready to come out soon.
Yeah.
I mean, they've been hiring pretty steadily every month. Like there hasn't been a month where they've actually decreased staff. It's always been an increase, even though we haven't gotten updated numbers for 4 months now. Prior to that, they've been increasing like crazy. Between 5 and 10 new employees every time they update. So they're ramping up all their projects. It's pretty clear.
I agree with you too. I think they're just being smart with their decision making in terms of they got to be a little bit more cautious now, which kind of is where I would like to take our conversation now. Moving along from like the Monolith conversation to our final fun topic for this episode, which comes in the form of a question from a patron, Straw Hat Ninja. And it's related to what we were just talking about, Nintendo's plans and what they'll be doing in the future, because no one likes to talk about this. I mean, I don't see anyone really mentioning this, and it's just like a subject that I think needs to be covered because it's been ignored for some months now. About, people just don't seem to care about, what Nintendo's doing. And every week people are just like, it's fine. They don't have to announce anything. No calls for a direct each week or something like that. Gosh, no, sorry. I'm trying to be, I'm feeling horribly. I'm not a comedian, but yeah.
I don't know. You were selling that. You were being serious there.
It's being, there is a rabidness to what's going on right now with the hunger and thirsting for knowledge. So sorry, the question from Star Hat Ninja is, greetings panel. People have been hard on Nintendo recently for Nintendo. Sorry, let me repeat this. Greetings, panel. People have been hard on Nintendo recently for not having directs or anything other than Pikmin 3 for the rest of the year. My question is, does Nintendo even need anything for the rest of the year? The Switch is selling great. Animal Crossing still selling great. Now, they definitely need something for November, and if it is the Mario Collection, I would think that would be enough to carry them through the rest of the year. Thoughts, love, and respect.
I guess I'll start. Do they need anything? Clearly not. Switch is literally selling more in basically every region than it ever has. Pretty much on the coattails of how massive Animal Crossing has been, which is maybe going to be the best-selling game in Japanese history at the rate it's going. But again, there's absolutely no way they are not going to have a big November holiday game. I won't even accept that fact. And maybe it'll be Super Mario 3D All-Stars, or maybe it'll be Super Mario, 3D World Deluxe. Maybe it'll be something else. Do they, need something? Probably not. Are they going to have something? I mean, when was the last November they didn't have a big holiday game of some kind? They're going to have something. It might not be what we all expect. I mean, I think we all maybe assume it's, Super Mario 3D, All-Stars, and that would sell probably 10 million units, I would assume, based on how much they update it and what's included. But yeah, they're going to have something. I feel like it's a strategic quietness from them. They have games. They're just not really sure how to present them, and love it or hate it, they're doing it through Twitter. So pretty much anytime they could announce a big holiday game on Twitter, there's really no way of knowing. But do they need something? No. Are they going to have something? Yeah.
Do they need to do anything? No, they don't. Not at the rate they're selling. Month after month. I mean, granted, you're just going by North America alone, NPD. Switch is the best-selling hardware by far, month after month. It's been that way all year. Will continue to be that way all year. Even with next gen coming out, they're only going to have so many available. It's going to be a very limited quantity. The Switch is probably still going to technically outsell them this year, for shortages alone. Will they have something? I actually don't know. Like, at first I'm always like, they're always going to have something. There's going to be a November game. But now it's just like, as day by day goes on, I'm like, part of me is almost like, I'm almost like an Ian Malcolm about this, where I'm just like, what kind of chaos will the internet bring if they don't? Like, what if they don't? Like, what happens if they just say, forget it? Like, we don't need to do anything. Like, what if they really just, Pikmin 3, that was it. We don't care. Like, you're still buying everything. Like, so there's a morbid curiosity in me to see what would happen if they did just forsake 2020 altogether. And some people might say, well, is Pikmin 3 good enough? No, absolutely not. Pikmin is a quality franchise that nobody buys. It is like Nintendo's Darkstalkers, where people ask for it, like, especially journalists. Like, I've noticed, like, in the games media, seems to really love Pikmin, but like generally speaking, it just doesn't sell. Like, it's never sold that well. They unfortunately, the first ones came out on GameCube, which didn't do too hot as a system overall, sales-wise. And then they kind of tried to do something again with the new play control on the Wii, and they tried Pikmin 3 on the Wii U, which, unfortunately, again, Wii U. But, like, that game's not going to do gangbuster numbers. It just isn't, because it's Pikmin. And it's a hard sell. It's always hard to sell an RTS-style game of any kind and sort, especially on console. Anyone remember Halo Wars 2? I sure don't. So yeah, like, it just I part of me is just kind of like, I would love to see what would happen. But on the flip side of that, there are management meetings. There's an investor meeting at the end of the month. it's going to be awkward, I think, is all heck, if Nintendo goes into the end of their third quarter financials and they're like, so what are you releasing product wise in the next quarter? And Nintendo just goes, I don't know. Like, just not to have an answer. Because, like, obviously Nintendo's under no obligation to answer the ravenous fans on the internet. But if you are a shareholder, or someone or an investor, I would actually be like I would look at your numbers and go, these are great numbers. All right, cool. What are you doing to make sure that you keep, you stay on top of the game here? And right now, Nintendo doesn't technically have an answer. They can always throw out, well, we got a Zelda game coming and Metroid someday and Bayonetta 3, but it's like Bayo and Metroid never sell that great. Just like Pikmin, maybe they sell better than Pikmin, but like just like Pikmin, Bayonetta 3 and even Metroid Prime 4 there's probably a ceiling that they're going to hit, and it's not going to be that gigantic. Like Zelda will sell easily 10 million copies, Zelda 2, just going off the hype of the first one alone. But yeah, there's definitely, I think there's definitely cause for concern cause for concern a little bit, just because I'm just like, they're doing fine sales wise, but it's so bizarre to me that they would miss out on the fourth quarter, like what is traditionally the biggest money-making quarter of the year in North America here. Well, I guess it's third quarter for them, fourth quarter for us, whatever. I was with you. Like, they'll announce something. It'll probably be a Mario collection, but that also feels, I don't know, maybe it feels lethargic if their big holiday game is a repackage of N64 and GameCube and Wii games. Like, games that are 10 to 20 years old, I'm like, that's your big product for the end of the year. I'm like, that's awesome, because Mario 64, Sunshine, Galaxy, those are fantastic games. Some of the best games ever, all time, right? But like, it's also kind of like, really, like, you're repackaging stuff you've repackaged and resold before, and that's all you got for the year, huh? Like, even Pikmin 3 falls into that pitfall a bit.
Yeah, worst case scenario, they lean heavily into the DLC, the fall update for Animal Crossing, the Pokemon Sword and Shield DLC, a Smash character maybe. That's like the worst case scenario, where they really lean into their DLC.
Yeah.
In terms of like the Mario collection, I agree. It depends how much they change the assets and really make them look like new games, how much content they add. I just think the idea of a 3D Mario collection is kind of appealing to.
Oh yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome, but I also sit there and look back and go like, that's kind of. But a game collection of old games is all you're bringing to the table for this year. Yeah. Like, I think the worst year Nintendo ever had otherwise was 2016, when the only two things they released were the NES Mini and Paper Mario Color Splash.
Oof.
That's because, the Wii U was pretty much dead at that point, so they didn't really have anything to really release. So, like, I think that was their worst. But, like, and I remember being at Comic-Con, San Diego Comic-Con that year when they announced the NES Mini. I'm like, okay, so this is it. They know the Wii U's dead, so they're going to sell us a retro console. And maybe that's it. What if November's big thing is, like, a retro Game Boy or a retro N64, like a mini? Like, what if that is their big go-to item for the end of the year? Oh, is he, Mike? He's upset about that already.
Yeah, you never know, but like, the fact is, Switch has the potential to sell like 1 million units just on Black Friday alone.
Yeah. And
normally they like to position a game right before that, a big game right before that, to just take advantage of it. They'll have something. They'll have some game. I can't imagine they're not going to. December they might not have a game. They've had that happen before.
Yeah.
November, though, not having a November game would be a pretty big deal.
Yeah, it really would. And like, there's a dark side of me because kind of wants to see that happen. not for Nintendo to be hurt or anything, but just to see how much just to see the internet lose its mind.
Yeah.
And they would.
Where's the direct? What are you doing?
I do think, though,
if
there's going to be something in November, I do think it'll be announced in September. We're on the cusp of being in September. By the time you're listening to this, it will be September. I just because they did this twice now. The lead time announcement, the social media announcement, release date.
Yeah.
Paper Mario, Pikmin 3, same. They like literally been 1, 2, bam. Announcement 2 months later, game coming, or 3 months later, big game coming out. So it's like September announcement, it will come out in November. So if it's the Mario Collection, that'll probably be it. It'll be the Mario Collection will be announced this month. It'll be their November title. I do think the wild card in this is not necessarily a game developed by them. I think there could be a third party title. You already mentioned Bayonetta 3, but it's not necessarily a system seller per se.
Yeah.
But I think having a Bayonetta 3 alongside Mario for November, having that 1-2 there, does strengthen the proposition a bit. So whether it's maybe this new Monster Hunter Switch rumor, maybe it's like way farther along, it's ready to come out or something. It's like they're doing the same thing, like, oh, we're gonna announce in September, it comes out in November, and like a Monster Hunter game for Switch would be at this point a very big deal for them as well, probably bigger than maybe the Mario collection. So there are other options out there that are not in-house first-party solutions. So,
yeah, absolutely. Bravely Default.
Yeah.
Bravely Default. Yeah, that's right. And Nintendo's publishing that, so they might also slot that in some month, assuming it's not delayed or anything.
Yeah, I mean, that could be the December title, honestly. When they're saying it might be harder for them, that could be it for sure.
Since this was a Monolith Soft thing, I kind of want to bring something up when we were talking about third-party projects. Because a lot of people bring up, we saw The Secret of Mana, we saw Dawn of Mana get a remake. We've seen sort of like Bravely Default 2, which is also a possibility for maybe like a November. I don't know when that's coming out. If it already has a release date, I'm unsure.
It doesn't yet.
So I could see maybe that's part of their November slate. But how would you feel if Square Enix, because they're kind of they're on a remake train, let's be honest here, with 7 and Dawn of Mana came out in the same month, and they've done stuff. What if they went to Nintendo, went to Monolith and said, hey, Xenogears remake, what do you guys think?
I think we would have heard about it by now if it's coming out this year.
Well, not this year, but would you want to say maybe Monolith get pulled one of its projects or whatever? Would you want to see them have to take time and talent away for a Xenogears remake? And how would you want to see a remake done if they were going to do it?
I definitely, I mean, the internet would flip out, and that alone would be worth it for me, just to see some kind of announcement trailer. I would love to see that. Having Square play ball with basically people who just left to form their own studio. I don't know if they left on good terms. It didn't seem like they did. So I don't know if they would play. I could see Square kind of not wanting to play ball that way.
Yeah, but on the other hand, it's also would Square do a remake on their own? I don't think they would, because it would be such a weird thing for them to try to do it. But it's like that team exists still, and they've actually, in a way, they've built up their name and their brand, through Nintendo now. It's a weird position, because I see it actually get brought up when you see games like Octopath and the Mana remakes and 7 remake, and they're like, when are they going to remake Xenogears? And I'm like, well, I just don't see them trying to do that unless they went to Monolith Soft. But if you went to Monolith Soft, that means it has to be a Nintendo exclusive, and then people get upset. Like, I thought this was a PlayStation game, and it's like, okay.
Yeah, I mean, the relationship between Nintendo and Square is probably as strong as it's ever been since the SNES days, just because of all the there's a lot of exclusives coming just to the Switch, even though they're not big, but they're supporting it with stuff that isn't on PlayStation 4, which is kind of crazy. So I mean, is it within the realm of possibility? Anything is possible. I would love to see it just for the reaction.
I see. I would enjoy it if they made it play like Blade, because then people will be like, oh, it's not like the original game. I'm like, oh no, it needs to be like Blade, personally, because I think that's kind of the one thing. And I'm surprised Bravely Default 2 doesn't have a release date already, but it is one of those things where it's I don't get quite as excited for those games, because they feel like they're, I don't know, part of me is just kind of okay, it's I'm just making an old school style game, and that's kind of it. Where it feels like Xenoblade feels more trying, shooting for the moon, going for modern, this is what the future of RPGs and whatnot are. But yeah, I think that's another interesting point though to bring up, to say in the future, we don't know what Nintendo's doing. We're kind of just assuming Mario, right? And then like we hope to see Zelda maybe next year, in whatnot. But with next gen coming out, if I was Nintendo, I might be a little concerned about third party support, because third party support is going to be rough going forward with next gen, because it's going to be harder and harder and harder to scale down to the Switch once next gen hits and everyone's shooting for next gen. And then all of a sudden, now it's no longer about can this PS4 game be scaled down to a Switch. Now it's can this PS5 game be scaled down to a PS4. And Switch is like, oh, forget it.
This is what the rumors will be able to answer at some point, potentially, whether the Switch Pro comes to pass at some point, whether there's a Switch successor, whether it's use of machine learning for 4K will be possible. But basically, the rumors say that while the Switch will not get incredibly more powerful, the DLSS has because Nintendo does work with NVIDIA for its graphics chip for the Switch. If there is some behind the scenes going on there, where the technology is at a point where they could upgrade the Switch and have that machine learning available to facilitate that process, it wouldn't put all the strain on having a more expensive powerful upgrade. It could just do some of the work for it behind that way. But yeah, I mean that's something that we'll see down the line, obviously. But to your point, to directly address your point, to maybe get towards wrap up this question about what Nintendo needs to do. Obviously, once either sales start slowing down or the competitors start catching up or surpass them, is when you'll see, if they haven't done anything by then yet, they haven't gone back to normal where they're announcing things in a regular pattern, that's going to put more pressure on them to have more answers, because people are going to be like, wait a second, you're no longer in the lead, you're falling behind, what's your answer now? And you can speculate what they're doing. I mean, whether they're, as you said, maybe these titles are further along, but they'd rather save them because it doesn't look like big releases are coming out anytime soon for the next gen consoles, after Halo Infinite just got delayed. Ratchet and Clank is going to be a launch window game. Who knows how long the window is for PS5's launch, which we still don't know when it's even coming out, or their prices. It's kind of a messy situation. And I think, as you said earlier, Stealth, Nintendo's being very strategic with its decisions right now. They don't have to tip their hand yet. They're not forced to doing anything yet. So why not make an unforced error by, Breath of the Wild comes out this year. It did great, but it would have been more valuable to come out Q1 next year when we have a gap, and that's when Sony and Microsoft are hitting the hardest or something. I don't know. We don't know enough to answer that, so it's kind of weird to speculate too much, other than curiosity for curiosity's sake, I guess.
And I think you make a good point there too, Mike, because a lot of people say Nintendo doesn't pay attention to anybody. They beat to their own drum. I don't think that's true. I think Nintendo absolutely does pay attention to what's going on. Maybe they don't make every judgment based on the release date of other competitors, but I think they're very aware of when games come out.
It is cordial PR speak when they say shit like that. Yeah. That is them trying to be humble. That is them trying to be very cordial, businesslike. These companies, they aren't bitter enemies or anything like that. They do speak highly of each other. They do have praises. There is admiration and respect. But at the end of the day, these are businesses. And if a business person tells you in the video game industry they're not paying attention to other video game companies are doing, that's full of shit. That's bullshit.
It's a lie.
That is the biggest lie. And then people who gobble that up, you have to understand it doesn't, as you said, Simmons, it doesn't influence every single thing. That's they're being brainwashed, and every employee. We have to always be thinking about this. They're cognizant. They are at the very least aware, and they care about what's being done to some extent, whether they say it to your face or not.
I think, you put Halo Infinite being delayed, to me was just I think Nintendo was just great. We don't really have to go release anything huge. We don't have to push any project, because, and you might think I'm crazy, but at the start of this year, back before the pre-apocalypse, I think Nintendo was sitting there going, maybe we push Zelda this year. Maybe if we see Sony and Microsoft come out with a really strong lineup for their next gen launches, we'll push Zelda this year. honestly think they would do that. Remember, Majora's Mask came out the same day in North America as the PS2, just for reference, and they've done that with other games too. So I'm like, but I also think that they're like, if Sony and Microsoft don't have a huge strong lineup, we won't push Zelda with this year. We'll push it to like the 4-year anniversary of the Switch or something, right? And I think the apocalypse happened, and they're like, "Oh, it's definitely not coming out this year." And then when I think they saw even Halo wasn't going to make it out this year, they're probably like even more like, "Yeah, whatever. We don't have to worry about anything." But I think they're absolutely looking at, Sony and Microsoft and going like, if I don't know, I don't think Horizon has like no release date, but it's like if Nintendo was sitting there like, if Sony came out and said Horizon Zero Dawn is coming out May of 2021 or Forbidden West, whatever, Journey West, I forget what it's called, something like that, Horizon 2, I think Nintendo would absolutely go, May sounds like a good time for Zelda. Like, because they did with the first game. The first game came out within like a week of each other or a few days of each other as well. They both sold amazingly. So I think Nintendo's very much going to be like, okay, we can't, if the Switch is riding high momentum now, but they have to know that next year, as supply becomes more consistent for PS5 and the Series X, as that supply becomes consistent, they know everyone's eyes are going to shift away from the Switch and start being like, I think I'll jump into PS5. I think I'll jump into this. And that's when they're going to probably strike with, okay, here's some really must-have games for the Switch. Take your mind off of these other next-gen consoles. Because right now, it's going to be tough to get a next-gen console. We don't even know what they cost. We don't know when they come out. I don't think that's a good idea for either of them. But Nintendo's like, well, our Switch is here, and it's here. It's available right now. You can buy Animal Crossing right now. So I think they're just going to ride high on that right now, just being purely available. And once it becomes more available next year, that's probably why they're holding back all this stuff. Like Stealth was saying, strategic.
Yeah. Switch is the Japanese market right now. They have like a 97% market share every week. Are they feeling anybody? Are they feeling sweat from anybody? No, they're really not. And I did have that feeling in January that Zelda might have been an end of the year game, but a game that we didn't talk about. I'm not sure how far along it is. It's possible, but new Pokemon Snap. It's possible. Depends how long. Yeah, I mean, it depends how long Bandai Namco has been working on it. Maybe. That's a possibility, but there's really no reason. I mean, Switch hasn't even had like an official price drop, I don't think. So they still haven't like played that card yet with Animal Crossing or something. So they're in a good position. Well, as good a position anybody can be for this year. And then, I think next year they'll like wait for a big game from. I don't even think they're worried about Microsoft, but they'll wait for a big game from PlayStation and then drop Zelda like the same week or something. Yeah. And it'll be interesting.
Yeah. So there's your answer, Straw Hat Ninja. They don't need to do anything. And at some point they probably will do something, but they're just, as Estelle said, they're in a very good position right now, and they're just being smart. That's just good business is the best way to put it, I guess, to say.
It sounds. I get it. It's infuriating for some of us to not know when anything's coming out. Maybe it sounds bad business. It's not good business not to have any product coming out. I'm like, it's coming. It's coming. But like you said, Mike, they'll announce a game this month or September for November. And they'll kind of like piecemeal it, and then maybe next year they'll get their gears going, and okay, here's a big direct or something like that.
You're right. It just
if the Switch wasn't selling as well as it was, I think they'd be a lot more loose. With their information.
More pressure. I mean, and like the thing that's like a fact, they're working on games. It's just whenever I see the sentiment that they have no announcements because they have no games, it's just like that's just. I was like, I don't know. I understand you're upset you're not getting announcements, but I mean, that doesn't mean they're just like not working on anything or games don't exist.
I don't know if you remember, but there was a direct early in the Wii U's life where they announced a bunch of games, including Xenoblade X for the first time.
Oh yeah, I remember it.
And it was kind of right after a bunch of news came out that like everyone stopped buying the Wii U. Like things started to look really all of a sudden. really
Yeah.
dire. All of a sudden, like just the sales dropped, like plateaued hard, like, and then all of a sudden, like, what happened then? Iwata came out with this huge Nintendo Direct announcing a bunch of big games for the system. So yeah, because they were scared and actually their backs were to the wall, I guess you could say a little bit, but no, not here. That's just not the case. That's why they're being so silent, because they're doing too well.
Yeah.
You keep buying Animal Crossing.
Hey, just keep buying Animal Crossing, and it'll keep getting updates, as you'll see. I think that is going to do it for this episode of Friend Code. So I want to start off by first saying thank you to all of our patrons who submitted questions for consideration for this episode. To submit questions for consideration for an episode of Friend Code, you got to be a $5 and up patron. I'll make the post calling for your submissions the week we'll be recording. Additionally, if you're a $5 and up patron, you are part of our early access tier. We get episodes of several of our shows and podcasts, including Friend Code, early. This will go up on Wednesday, so 2 days before it goes live on YouTube for the public. So thank you for supporting us in that way. We also have some shout outs for the month of August. This is the very end of August. This is like the very last minute of August. So these are the last time our August shout out people are getting their shout outs. So special thanks to these $250 and up patrons shout outs for. Sorry. That was my cat who was about to knock over my green screen there and freaked me out. You couldn't hear it because of RTX's voice, but it sounded like my green screen was about to fall over. And I had to be like, are you kidding me? So I apologize. Shout out tier. So our $250 shout out tier. Thank you so much. That is El Thanis, Greg the Dark Knight Kettering, Caleb Togi Crawford, Jail Burden LLC, Jeff Zio VGM Easton, and Delissi. Shout out and thank you so much for your support. And as a reminder, for this coming month of September, if you're still looking to get in on the shout out tier, we expanded it to 10 slots, which means there are still several slots open, but you got to get it in really quickly because I think the cutoff is. I think the cutoff might have actually happened. As Bloworth explained it to me, I think the first is you have to get it in before the midnight of tonight. So 11:59 p.m. the night before the first of the month is the last day, and then by the 5th it authenticates. So sorry, I think it's still a little late, but hopefully we got some new people to join. So, but then again, thank you so much for everyone who supports the show. But also thank you to both of you. Thank you, Simmons. Thank you, Self, for joining me. And before we sign off here, I wanted to give you both a chance to let everyone know where they could catch more of your work or just follow you if they want to hear more from you. So, start with you, Simmons.
I on YouTube, you can find me on youtube.com/YoVideoGames, and my Twitch is my name or my Twitch channel is AssistMeDoom, twitch.tv/AssistMeDoom, where I'm more of a variety streamer, but every Monday is Monolith Soft Monday. So every Monday night I play a Monolith Soft game, whether it be a game they directly worked on or a game that was just asset help. I play a Monolith Soft game every Monday night. Twitch.tv/AssistMeDoom.
You can find me on Twitter at Stealth40K. I'm also on Twitch, although I haven't been streaming regularly the last couple of weeks because I got a new job. But when I do stream, thank you. I stream Nintendo games. I stream RPGs. And on Mondays, you will regularly catch me in the chat of Monolith Soft Mondays. I try to watch.
Thank you. Yeah, that's
good stuff.
I have to decide because it's Monday. I have to decide which game I want to dive into today. I don't know. I might just kick back and play like one of the Xenoblades, but
good. Always a good choice. Well, thank you both of you for joining me for this very long episode. Just clocking in just shy under 3 hours. This might be our longest episode.
It didn't feel a minute over an hour.
So thank you again for joining me, and until next time, everybody, may the way of the hero lead to the Triforce. Bye-bye.